What's up everybody, it's Critical. I love fucking golden gooses and I came early and I love it.
Woo! Yeah, baby! That's what it is.
Hi, I'm Skylar. I'm transgender and stuff, but that's okay. We can enjoy this video regardless of how you feel about that. Maybe you don't feel anything about that, but why am I talking about this? Geez, Skylar, you're already fucking up the video. Okay, what's important is that if I'm going to be talking about this specific subject, I need to lay some ground rules. First and foremost is that I spent way too long on this video. I'm serious, I spent 5 years on this video. You can go ahead and point and laugh. That's clearly too long for a video response that I'm currently making to what I would equate to as a shitpost. As in, what I'm responding to is not only a shitpost in the meme terminology, but it is a shitty fucking video. Secondly, we're going to be talking about some serious subjects, including fascism. And fascism is not a subject to take lightly, and we will be dissecting it very carefully. The video that I will be responding to is a video that has attempted to summarize this subject in the span of 10 minutes. There are people who can talk about this at great length within the course of 10 minutes. But in my opinion, this video is extremely irresponsible. And in my opinion, this person at least owes it to himself and his audience to reevaluate some of the things that he said all of these years ago. And because this person opened a huge fucking can of worms for us to dive into, no, this video will not be short. I can't make it short. You can't fucking stop me, and I can't fucking stop me either. I tried to make this shorter. Look, I'm sorry. I know that y'all are on TikTok and y'all have the attention span of 4 minutes and 20 seconds, but I can't really help it. I tried making this video shorter. I spent 5 fucking years trying to make this fucking video, this video you're watching right now, shorter. And lastly, I just want to make one thing really fucking clear. My conclusion in this video is not that this person that I'm responding to is a fascist. While we will be talking about fascism, the conclusion of this video is not that this person is a fascist. We will be dissecting into this person's political views, even though this person may on the surface appear to not have any political views. Or at least that's what they would like you to think. But for what it is worth, even though I'm literally small potatoes and this person is a fucking German shepherd on steroids on the YouTube presence scale, I am not looking to levy any kind of so-called cancellation or anything like that. That's not what I'm interested in doing. I'm here to levy more so of a conversation, a dialogue, something that I think that maybe this person has not really considered in the past. So anyway, let's just fucking get into it. Let's talk about satire.
In time of war, it's typical, sometimes even useful, to demonize your enemy. We still see this today whenever a dictator or despot comes to power anywhere in the world. Caricatures and jokes, not always in the best of taste, rise to the forefront because it's our way of relieving aggression. So it was in World War II. Some people feared Adolf Hitler. Others mocked him. The Disney staff came up with the idea for a cartoon to be titled Donald Duck in Naziland, giving the all-American duck a nightmare that he was living in a country run by Nazis. The title changed when a song written for the cartoon by Oliver Wallace became a runaway hit and a now classic recording by Spike Jones.
When the Führer says, here's the rat race, we Heil! Heil! Ain't in the Führer's face not to love the Führer. He's a great disgrace, so we Heil! Heil! Ain't in the Führer's face.
Firstly, I don't take fascism lightly. Fascism isn't really something that can be considered the punchline of an edgy joke. Of course, jokes about fascism can be made in the context of punching upward, such as in the case of the short film Der Führer's Face, a 1943 anti-Nazi Disney classic. In this film, Donald Duck is depicted in a nightmarish setting, toiling at a factory in Nazi Germany. While this movie was produced explicitly with the intent of selling war bonds, and it can be also argued that Disney's racist depictions make the weight of this film fall flat, this cartoon and the song accompanying that cartoon is an example of comedy and even satire. Satire is a genre of media, whether it is music, literature, theatrical performance, internet memes, or television shows that critique broader social issues through exaggeration and wit. So, in the perspective of this short film, Nazis are drawn in an extremely exaggerated fashion, though I would argue that that's how they actually are in real life, but I digress, I'm getting sidetracked here. Donald Duck is seen unable to even catch a break from the life of Nazi Germany. He can't get out of bed without saluting the Sieg Heil to the leaders of the Axis of Evil, and can't even safely eat breakfast without the SS marching band storming into his house. He even sprays his mouth with bacon and egg perfume, which may or may not be a reference to Coco Chanel's ties to Nazi leaders at that time. Again, I digress. During the scene where Donald Duck is toiling in the factory, he is required to Sieg Heil framed pictures of Adolf Hitler while screwing ammunition cells on an assembly line. So we can already see that this short film is absurd, but it's not unfounded in the statement on its own right. If we apply the context of this moment in history, especially the part where Donald Duck is dealing with unfair working conditions, we can apply this to the moment in history where Nazis targeted trade unions for capitalistic dominance of the country and industry, which, while absolutely awful, is by no means the worst thing that they did at that time. However, the nature of the setting in which this film takes place is rooted in the reality of their environment. Thus, the short film is satire. And I opened this video with talking about satire because of the video I will be responding to.
What's up everybody, it's Critical.
In 2017, Critical made a video called Why Kids Love Fascist Cartoons Like Thomas the Tank Engine and Paw Patrol.
What's up everybody, it's Critical. I love laughably bad modern journalism. Right now my go-to golden goose is Polygon. It's just a fucking cornucopia of entertainingly abysmal articles. Christmas came early many years ago and Christmas never left. This is the gift that keeps on giving. It's like the fucking Allspark, just giving life to new awful articles, and I love it. But today out of nowhere, the delightful children from down the lane published a real prostate tickling article on CNN called Why Kids Love Fascist Cartoons Like Paw Patrol and Thomas the Tank Engine. And man, is this one hell of a read. This article really sums up 2017 nicely. This is pretty much what American culture has devolved into. Everything's fascist, everything is Nazi, everything is bad, everyone is evil, and here's why.
My first criticism, no pun intended, is that this video is extremely disingenuous at best and flat out shitty at worst. Right off the bat, we can see that Critical doesn't even bother to include a thumbnail for this video, meaning that he must have produced this really quickly to ensure that he had a video out in time to appease the algorithm. And I'm not faulting him for trying to appease the algorithm, and even the point about the thumbnail is a nitpick, but I am saying that this is an extremely lazy video, especially when addressing his actual points that he makes in this video.
Overall, just so incredibly sad. She understands nothing about why kids like the shows, and she just looks for this controversial statement where it's a fascist show and the white males have ruined it and just converted their children to Nazism.
The other issues that I take with this video is that while he is justified in criticizing the piss-poor writing of the CNN opinion piece, which I will also be criticizing in my own video as well, his fucking video response is no better than the CNN article that he is critiquing in the first place. In fact, I will go as far as to say that he does not define what fascism is or how it does or does not relate to the properties of the article that it is talking about, being Thomas the Tank Engine and Paw Patrol. I would even argue that Critical isn't even being satirical, and if there is any element of satire to be had in this video, it is at grade school playground level, nonsensical ass dribblings. But here's my side note here. I used to be a fan of Critical right around the time I graduated high school, which was when I discovered him on Equal3. My friends and I eventually abandoned Equal3. We would be in my bedroom playing video games and simultaneously watching Critical's videos back in the early 2010s, and my friends and I would even be walking to the liquor store to pick up a soda while we were quoting Critical and his funny fucking lines. Hey, I just wanted to clarify something and say that I unsubscribed to Critical back in 2012, but it wasn't for any gripe or grievances that I had with him personally. Around this time, I was still exploring anarchism more intently, and I was beginning to understand that the content I was watching before wasn't so much in my interest as it was in 2012. Now, it should be stated that I was watching some pretty cringy shit around this point, such as Thunderfoot and The Amazing Atheist.
Blueberry pie, blueberry pie, blueberry pie, blueberry pie.
But I only unsubscribed from Critical because his content just wasn't what I was into at the time, and it's not because of anything that he said around this point. For reference, I did resubscribe to him in 2017, and this video about Fascism, Thomas, and Paw Patrol appeared in my subscription feed. It just felt out of character. Not because he was being political, but actually on the contrary, he was dubiously trying to make this case that there was no politics to be had in shows about trains and police dogs, which is kind of absurd when you really think about it. We will talk about why that is later in this video. But for the time being, it's worth mentioning that this video that he produced is the least critical video that he's ever produced. As in, he's trying to dissuade criticism or a critical analysis of media. And he's kind of being really lazy about it too. So, as juvenile as I sound here, I know that Critical can be fucking hilarious and downright joyful to watch.
Hell no can be low on automatically if make call find it and low on. How about you low on some birthday candles? So simply very ood. What the fuck is this? What the fuck? Gear. Yeah, gear up for the apocalypse. Holy shit, that's fucking terrifying.
But in this video, he not only delivers a less than average video, not only did he put so little effort into making this video, not only is this video not even funny, but I would argue that this video is even harmful to a major degree. None of this is to say that he isn't funny today, but he still owes it to himself to reflect on this video that he produced. He made this video. He said these words. Let's just address its actual points, because I know that if I don't do this early into the video, people will get on my ass about this.
I'm not gonna read this whole thing to you verbatim like it's a fucking bedtime story. I'm sure all of you out there have at least a 3rd grade reading level and can understand author Alyssa Strauss's writing here. It's not very complex, it's not Shakespearean, it's not even good writing.
Critical's humor is pretty much just him improving the entire time. He's usually just like going on these large hyperboles that are, you know, they don't always make sense, they don't always land, but they're there. And sometimes these hyperboles do land. Sometimes these hyperboles are fucking hilarious. But in here, I don't think that this form of hyperbole works because he's criticizing a media criticism of these two properties, Paw Patrol and Thomas the Tank Engine. And it seems like the criticism that is being levied here from this author is that there are fascist elements, or these shows are just flat out fascist.
The first thing she talks about here is, you know, all parents want their children to be part of this utopia where unicorns are pissing out rainbows and the rainbows are shitting out flowers and the flowers are getting bukkakied by butterflies. Perfect world, nothing ever goes wrong. No one gets hurt, there's no boo-boos. But unfortunately, our kids are just born evil and perverted by popular culture, and one of the biggest culprits is the cartoons. And then she goes on to say, 2 of the most divisive shows are Thomas the Tank Engine and Paw Patrol. Since when? She says this with such confidence that it's common knowledge that parents are afraid of Thomas the Tank Engine and Paw Patrol like it's some type of modern-day boogeyman. Oh, if you catch your kid watching Paw Patrol or Thomas the Tank Engine, it's already too late. You might as well just put the child down. They've already become Hitler.
What the fuck are you talking about? Let's read the article, because we all have 3rd grade reading levels. We can read it just perfectly fine, right, Critical? Parents like to see themselves as purveyors of possibility. We want our children to inhabit a world in which identities are both mutable and equal, and imagination and empathy reign supreme. But young children, as dictated by their tastes in popular culture, have something else in mind. They're drawn to worlds in which identities are fixed, order trumps imagination, and transgressions are met with routine punishment. This clash between what parents desire for their children and what children desire for themselves is most easily observable in cartoon preferences. So often, the more parents dislike a show, the more their children love it. 2 of the most divisive shows are Thomas the Tank Engine and Paw Patrol, both of which have been eviscerated by grown-ups on discussion boards in social media and in widely shared essays in prestigious publications. Now, throwing away all this extra fucking commentary that is just kind of nothing commentary, if I'm just being brutally honest here, about rainbow, unicorn, pissing, bukkake, butterfly flowers, and all that.
Unicorns are pissing out rainbows and the rainbows are shitting out flowers and the flowers are getting bukkakied by butterflies.
Because again, that's his style of humor. That's what he does. That's like his thing. It's just really perplexing that he takes such a strong distaste for this article, because I think in the premise of it, it's a pretty fair question. Like, if the children are going to be consuming media, at least the parents should be aware of what that media is, at the very minimum, right? And I think even the thesis of the article itself is posing a pretty interesting point, that we want to shape our children's future for tomorrow. Like, I'll tell you this much, I certainly don't want there to be children's hospitals being bombed anymore by those who follow Matt Walsh.
Authorities said they responded to Boston Children's Hospital on Tuesday night over a bomb threat. There has been an increase in threats of violence against the hospital over its surgical program for transgender youth. Officials have not released the details of the bomb threat, and the incident remains under investigation. Boston Children's Hospital has the first U.S. pediatric and adolescent transgender health program. The hospital only offers gender-affirming surgeries for people at least 18 years old. In the past, the hospital said it is concerned about the attacks fueled
by misinformation.
But I digress. But that's the thing, is that children are influenced by the media that they consume. We all are. None of us are immune to propaganda. Even I am not immune to propaganda, as class conscious as I am. Don't let Critical or any of his followers or anyone that he hangs out with try to convince you that he's not either. Let's just be honest here.
You have meddled with the primal forces of
nature, Mr. Beale, and I won't have it. You think you merely stopped a business deal? That is not the case. The Arabs have taken billions of dollars out of this country, and now they must put it back. It is ebb and flow, tidal gravity. It is ecological balance. You are an old man who thinks in terms of nations and peoples. There are no nations. There are no peoples. There are no Russians. There are no Arabs. There are no third worlds. There is no West. There is only one holistic system of systems. One vast and immane, interwoven, interacting, multivariate, multinational dominion of dollars. Petrodollars, electrodollars, multi-dollars, Reichmarks, rims, rubles, pounds, and shekels.
We're gonna need to pull the microscope back a little bit and look at the big picture here, and to some extent, this actually defends Critical's main points to a minor degree. Let's remember something here. The United States is an absolutely capitalist nation state. Every political and economic endeavor it makes is under the guise of the private ownership of the means of production, as opposed to the public ownership or the workers' ownership of the means of production. We're going to put a pin on this subject for later. Beyond the video in which I am responding to, there's a broader conversation at play here, or at least more appropriately referred to as an ongoing online outrage about the so-called woke media, that supposedly the liberals are dominating media with messages of inclusion and sometimes delving into narratives and themes that were not previously conventional on television, film, and video games. This outrage of so-called woke media and the triggered SJWs was a trend throughout the previous decade, and it appears to be lingering in the contemporary to this very day. But do any of these critics really see anything here? Because no matter how many videos they post about how supposedly politics is sweeping its way into forms of media, and supposedly the SJWs are triggered because there's supposedly a bunch of bigots who supposedly don't like these movies for supposedly bad story writing, the corporations who make these movies benefit financially from this discourse, and they know that there is a discourse at play here. They know that there will be people who will react this way.
Dear HBO Max, they just learned you intend to make a genre-bending comedic origin story of Judy Jetson. When I heard this new version of Judy Jetson wouldn't be boy crazy, the only word I had to describe my disgust is jinkies. If there is one thing the internet agrees on, it's that you should never change anything ever. I hope you die. Sincerely, Velma. Well, at least Judy's still white.
You really think that they don't know what they're doing? They know what they're doing. They're creating a manufactured outrage. Major corporations have seen this happen in the past, like examples in Ghostbusters 2016, and they're manufacturing an outrage for goons like you to go fucking crazy about and blame the SJWs or whatever. They profit off of your hysteria. And Critical, responding to this article from CNN about Thomas the Tank Engine and Paw Patrol being fascist or whatever, is an example of this. It is an example of what is called manufactured consent. In his book, Manufacturing Consent, Noam Chomsky discusses how the media plays a significant role in various ways in our society. The mass media serves as a system for communicating messages and symbols to the general populace. It is their function to amuse, entertain, and inform, and to inculcate individuals with the values, beliefs, and codes of behavior that will integrate them into the institutional structures of the larger society. In a world of concentrated wealth and major conflicts of class interest, to fulfill this role requires systemic propaganda. And systemic propaganda is crucial for people with wealth and political power to dominate its people without resistance and dissent, because that's easier to do than just fighting an endless war of class conflict. by controlling what the public thinks of its rulers and the status quo. What do I mean by this? Well, I'd like to introduce you to Ben Bichikian, an Armenian genocide survivor and American journalist who released a book in 1983 called The Media Monopoly. And as time went on, this man has had to revise this book multiple times because information just kept updating until he passed away in 2016. The reason for these constant updates was because the number of corporations who owned the majority of the media kept decreasing up until present day. We are at 5 corporations who own 90% of the media. Disney, Time Warner, News Corporation, Viacom, and Bertelsmann. Ben Bichikian has said this gives each of the 5 corporations and their leaders more communications power than was exercised by any despot or dictatorship in history. So, in essence, this gives private entities editorial power and influence over what is reported in the media. It can also be decided what is reported and unreported solely based on the interests of its political and financial backers. Ben Bichikian would go on to say, if you control the gate of the only well in town, you can charge whatever you want, or you can deny access to whomever you want. You can have the dirtiest water at the highest prices, and there will be very little choice. In execution, this coercive form of censorship has varying effects on how people are informed about events that occur around the world. Private corporations own your mainstream news. Some people think that CNN, which is owned by Warner Brothers Discovery and by extension Time Warner, has an incentive to adhere to some wacky cabal of liberal Jewish elites. But this is a gross misunderstanding of the structure that incentivizes itself to adhere to the interests of its financial owners. We will talk about this anti-Semitic conspiracy theory that I just mentioned later on, but just know that the idea that Jews own the banks and Jews own the media and Jews own this and Jews own that is a crazy conspiracy theory that led to the Holocaust in Germany. Not to mention that Holocaust deniers actually do subscribe to some of these media sources, including Fox News. But sometimes there may be some more progressive reporting from some of these news outlets, including CNN. But it will rarely, if not, it will never outright criticize the corporate interest. To put it simply, some people will criticize CNN for simply being the mainstream media, and will flock to Fox News for their information. But the truth of the matter is that both CNN and Fox News are not only mainstream media, but they are owned by Warner Brothers Discovery and Disney respectively, and their so-called political agendas are loyal strictly to those investors and owners. By the way, I'm not claiming that Critical is a subscriber of Fox News, I'm just using this as an example. By the way, earlier this year, I did a video about the Miracle of Our Lady of Fatima, a 1952 film that is a bastardization of an event that took place in 1917 in Portugal. And this movie that was produced by Warner Brothers, which remember, they own CNN as well, was endorsed by fascist dictator Antonio de Oliveira Salazar. You can go ahead and check out that video in the description as well if you're interested. Which should tell you something, that corporations like CNN, they don't genuinely care about social justice or progressive messaging, they care about money. This form of social justice journalism is very disingenuous and performative at best. Ben Bichikian would say by now the corporations that dominate our media, like alcoholic fat cats, treat this situation as theirs by right. Their concept of a diversity of views is the full range of politics and social values from center to far right. The American audience, having been exposed to a narrowing range of ideas over the decades, often assumes that what they see and hear in the major media is all there is. There is no way to maintain a lively marketplace of ideas, which is to say, it is no way to maintain a democracy. Which means that hard-hitting radical ideas like anti-capitalism, anti-fascism, decolonization, anarchism, environmentalism, socialism, and radical movements will often by design be obfuscated, lied about, or censored completely. Referring back to Noam Chomsky and his book Manufacturing Consent, he elaborates on this much further. Large corporate advertisers on television will rarely sponsor programs that engage in serious criticism of corporate activities, such as the problem of environmental degradation, the workings of the military-industrial complex, or corporate support of and benefits from third world tyrannies. So, what I think we can draw from this to sort of loop this back around to the main subject at hand is that subjects such as fascism aren't taken as legitimate threats because of the public's lack of understanding of what fascism even is. In the article that Critical is referring to, neither he nor Alyssa even define what fascism is. And I think to give Critical at least a little bit of credit here, he is right to feel like the article that he is responding to is poorly written. It is poorly written, and I think that since neither Critical nor Alyssa have taken the time to define fascism for this discussion, I think it's going to be my inherited responsibility to do so. God damn it, this video is already so long! I want to get a few commonly frequent bad arguments and misconceptions that are usually being made when discussing Nazis or tenets of fascism. Holocaust denialism will not take place here. Sorry, but not sorry, and I will not have that nonsense here. Take your bad faith argument somewhere else, maybe in a hole 6 feet under. Secondly, it has been reported, even by the FBI of all sources, that white supremacists have infiltrated all forms of US law enforcement, which is really not a shocker here, let's just be honest, we all know. Also, there is something that Critical is doing. He is accusing Alyssa of Godwin's Law.
Just converted their children to Nazism.
For those uninitiated, Godwin's Law is an assertion that online discussions will descend into talking about Hitler or the Nazis the longer a political conversation continues.
You're such a fascist!
Peace pusher!
Declaring Godwin's Law is to imply that Nazis and fascists are being used in an argument as hyperbole for something that is bad and should be disregarded. Godwin's Law has been observed in several political discussions that went out of fucking control, but to this I would argue that while Nazis and fascists are something to be considered bad, the conversation surrounding these aspects of our history should be viewed as a lesson. A lesson that this should never fucking happen again. In popular culture, Nazis are usually portrayed as some abstract, absurd level of evil that is virtually unachievable unless you were literally Hitler himself, or that no one, no matter how evil of a dictator they may seem, they are just simply not comparable to the outlandish evils of Nazis. For instance, the Armenian genocide, which was militantly pushed by the Young Turks of Turkey to ethnically cleanse Armenians and Assyrians. At the time of this genocide taking place, over 3/4 of the Armenian global population were rendered dead. That is 75% of the entire Armenian global population. The Armenian genocide is downplayed horrendously, especially in the United States, where most of the Armenian refugees have migrated to during this genocide, and that's because Turkey and the United States are allies in NATO. And economically, the United States needs Turkey for its own economic trade. In the US, Christopher Columbus is regarded as a hero, even holding a federal holiday to his name. Not only did he play a key role in the Atlantic slave trade and the genocide of indigenous peoples, but his duty was sworn to the interest of the King and Queen of Spain. His job was strictly to sell them a sales pitch, with investing in enslavement of people from Africa and the Americas for the sake of commodifying people to build an empire. So why is he considered such a hero in the United States? He was strictly loyal to the monarchy of Spain, with blood on his hands. But do you think that the paramilitary fascist group Patriot Front really gives two shits of what the fucking monarchy of Spain has to think about the US? Okay. What about Augusto Pinochet, one of Latin America's worst dictators ever? Pinochet was planted in Chile on September 11th, 1973, when the United States invaded with a coup d'etat, and then Chilean President Salvador Allende committed suicide. By the way, Allende was the first democratically elected Marxist president in Latin American history. Some of Allende's political accomplishments was expanding land seizures from landowners and slave plantations, begun by his predecessor, which was of course opposed by other landowners, but not the peasants, because wouldn't you guess it, giving the land back exponentially improved the quality of life for peasants. Also for women, there were public food programs, women's health care, and funding daycare centers, and he even expanded the education system, improving quality of life for students and the working class. Wowee, sounds fucking great. Too bad the United States doesn't like that. The United States wanted none of that because it wasn't profitable, so they invaded and implemented a de facto undemocratic dictator who not only reversed all of that, but implemented some pretty gnarly torture methods and tightened vagrancy laws that would render people summarily executed for breaking these laws. And I should make a note that I am not calling Christopher Columbus or necessarily Augusto Pinochet fascist in this video, though I will touch upon that later. Christopher Columbus predates the rise of fascism by a few hundred years, while Augusto Pinochet was more anti-communist than he was fascist. Furthermore, if we're going to be talking about fascism and what is qualified as fascism, we should probably define it first. Fascism is a dictatorial power of forcible suppression of its opposition. It is a form of far-right authoritarian ultranationalism that mythologizes a so-called rebirth of a nation or society. And it should be highlighted that the term fascism and what it means is not universally agreed upon, but there are plenty of qualifiers that make it helpful for this video. Fascism can be seen as a mode of dominance and rule, rather than a political party. Sure, there are different fascist fringe groups, even with fascism in the name, especially if they're going to throw optics down the toilet.
We robots are assigned to specific zones based on occupation. We're strictly forbidden to operate outside of our areas. And that robot was not authorized to work at surface level. He's supposed to be underground.
Yeah, but who are those guys? They look like fascists.
The Marduk. They were a political party, but evolved into a kind of vigilante group to calm anti-robot sentiment. Today, their main occupation is terminating robots which are malfunctioning or breaking the law.
But fascism is not really a political party. There is no the fascist party or the fascist organization. Fascists know that fascism is unattractive and not preferable for a society to be run under. Therefore, it is a coercively dominant ideology. It is a belief that supremacist marginalization of whatever its opposition is should be eliminated for a drunken mythos of a rebirth of society. Also, fascism doesn't exactly look the same in every society that it inhabits, and not everyone or everything can be accurately called fascist. Nazis, for instance, fit the qualification of fascism very closely because they believe in a form of ultranationalism that, to them, felt justified in their violence and marginalization of its claimed opposition. Christopher Columbus, while no doubt an evil man, isn't characteristically fascist because his agenda was colonialism for the sake of the monarchy of Spain. Even Augusto Pinochet, while having been accused of being a fascist dictator, is still widely up for debate. But I think it's important to see where these accusations are coming from, and maybe there's some weight to this one. Roger Griffin, author of The Nature of Fascism, argues that Pinochet was a populist ultranationalist, but was not focused on the palingenesis of society or even coercing the citizens to conform to such a belief. However, why don't we take a page out of the Penis Man himself? On October 11, 1973, 1 month after the coup d'etat committed by the United States. Once the previous goals has been secured, the armed and law enforcement forces will give way to the re-establishment of our democracy, which must be reborn, purified of the vices and bad habits that ended up destroying our institutions. Keeping in mind that while this individual fetishized the hell out of Napoleon Bonaparte, this is very evident in this quote that Pinochet took an interest in a rebirth and purification of the nation of Chile. And in the same excerpt, Pinochet continues by saying, all this requires efforts and sacrifices that we are willing to assume, trusting in the final success of the mission that we have proposed. Inspired by the Portalian spirit that illuminates this room today, in which the people have all merged in longing for peace and progress. And all of this drunken romantic babbling about a so-called Portalian spirit is in reference to Diego Portales, an entrepreneurial politician in Chile. Portales valued conservatism and sought to create a unitary government when co-creating the Chilean Constitution in 1883. This constitution made Catholicism the state religion and made it illegal for other religious beliefs from being able to be practiced publicly or even privately for that matter. And even at this time in history, it was deemed authoritarian by its political opponents, and the Constitution supported an authoritarian presidential system. So if we're using this as a basis for what Pinochet believes, a mythologized rebirth of a nation influenced by nostalgic ass-droppings like Diego Portales and everything Diego Portales stood for, then we can say that if someone were to call Augusto Pinochet and his supporters as fascists, it would be very justified in their very strong claim, and they'd have some weight to support that. So the reason why I bring all this up is to further clarify my stance here. In this video, as I am using the term fascist not as a pejorative, but as a descriptor for the political influence of the societal mode, especially a society that is dominated by its leaders and what their political influences are. Plus, fascists themselves try to regularly blur the lines on what qualifies as fascism, which makes it much harder to combat. Otherwise, this whole section of the video would have been much shorter. But considering that there was a neo-Nazi rally happening this previous weekend, as of recording this in Orlando, Florida, I feel that such a discussion is necessary. First of all, fascism is highly mythological. It relies on manipulative rhetoric to get recruitment, as it spreads misinformation on what fascism is and how it rises as well. One such example of this effort is the use of the word Lügenpresse, as weaponized and coined by the German Nazi Party and Adolf Hitler himself, in order to sow distrust within the media that critiqued the German Nazi Party, as well as Adolf Hitler and its rise to power. This manipulative rhetoric was so popular that it eventually gave the original German Nazi Party the power to crush unions and further propagate the myth that Marxist Jews were running the banks. And as you can see, it eventually became an anti-Semitic slippery slope to pass anti-Semitic legislation and policies that would eventually become what we know as the Holocaust. The Nazis very specifically organized on the spread of misinformation, as well as propagating an anti-communist emboldenment of German nationalism. This type of propaganda was also used on children, institutionalizing the anti-Semitic policies and normalizing anti-Semitic violence. Book burnings was also normalized in Germany at the time as well, typically burning books that the German Nazi Party described as degenerate. And it's important that I point this out because just recently there was a book burning in Tennessee right after the McMinn School County Board decided to ban the Pulitzer Prize winning graphic novel Mouse. While the School County Board decided to ban the book for words like goddamn and naked pictures, the book burning was organized by Pastor Greg Locke, who regularly organizes so-called witchcraft book burnings, burning this particular graphic novel because of its depiction of Polish Jews surviving the Holocaust. I hope that in making this, that I don't have to keep going, that I don't have to explain the death toll and what this eventually spiraled into. Some people may feel that I have already over-explained the situation, but I don't think that's the case. Because if you feel that I have over-explained the history of fascism and why fascism is bad, then we need to further observe why fascism is bad today.
Mainstream media, or perhaps we should refer to them in the original German, Lügenpresse. Indeed, one wonders if these people are people at all. Or instead soulless golem, animated by some dark power to repeat whatever talking point John Oliver stated the night before. America was, until this past generation, a white country, designed for ourselves and our posterity. It is our creation, it is our inheritance, and it belongs to us.
There's something that I think is critical for critical to understand here. Normally, I wouldn't make a long and tiring video to such a small, minuscule post from like 5 years ago, and then proceed to work on this video for 5 fucking years. But this video stood out from the rest of his content. He said something that I think it's kind of unforgivable. Upon first hearing it, I couldn't believe myself. I thought that my fucking hearing aids were playing tricks on me. But no, I listened to it several times, especially in the last 5 years, and no, my hearing aids are not playing tricks on me. They're legitimately his words.
This article really sums up 2017.
It's thinking.
Yes, Critical. What happened in 2017? What happened in 2017? Why don't we have a fucking look at what happened in 2017? I mean, besides the obligatory reference of Donald J. Trump's inauguration as the 45th President of the United States, right-wing violence quadrupled throughout the United States in 2017. According to the Center for Strategic and International Studies, terrorist attacks committed by the right wing between 2007 and 2011 was 5 or less per year. But in 2012, the year of the Sandy Hook shooting, that number of attacks increased to 14. And with this context, we can then observe a steady boiling point of right-wing terrorist attacks between 2012 and 2016, all the way up until 2017, where it reached a staggering motherfucking 31 terrorist attacks committed by right-wing extremists and whack jobs. Again referencing the Center of Strategic and International Studies, and this is a quote, The perpetrators of these attacks were mostly white supremacists and sovereign citizens. So, in other words, they don't give two shits about the very laws of the country that they themselves pledge allegiance to, because they're so brainwashed into thinking Daddy Trump can just override their persecution. And we all know how well that went on January 6, 2021. And on the subject of the sovereign citizens movement, the Southern Poverty Law Center had this to say, which is also a quote. The roots of the movement are racist and anti-Semitic. It was founded by William Porter Gale, former member of the John Birch Society. Potter formed a group of anti-government Christian identity adherents who mistrust state and federal officials. They believed that non-white people were not human, and that Jews possessed a satanic plot to take over the world. They identified themselves as Posse Comitatus, which is Latin for power of the county, and centers the idea that county sheriffs are the highest governmental authority. So, yeah, 2017 was really fucking something when it comes to fascist terrorist organization and fascist terrorist attacks committed by white supremacists.
This is pretty much what American culture has devolved into. Everything's fascist, everything is Nazi, everything is bad, everyone is evil, and here's why.
Why don't we look down this rabbit hole of white supremacy, and we'll look through the 2017 hat for references, just so we're not fucking lazy about our coverage of this specific era of our lifetimes. On February 22nd, 2017, a man by the name of Adam Purinton shot two Indian men in Olathe, Kansas, outside of Austin's bar, killing one of the two men. Adam, the idiot who shot these two men, killing one of them, mistook them for being Iranian. He yelled, "Get out of my country," referring to them as terrorists before shooting them. He pled guilty in court and received 3 life sentences for his impulsively violent behavior. On March 20th, 2017, James Harris Jackson, a 28-year-old white man, drove all the way from Baltimore, Maryland, 3 days in advance to New York City with every intention of killing black men, in order to, in his words, prevent white women from having interracial relationships with them. Interestingly, Jackson grew up in a liberal household and lived in an almost all-white part of the Baltimore area. His grandfather was an advocate of racial integration, and throughout his life, he was the victim of cross burnings on his front lawn. Jackson harbored racist views in secret and only shared them with like-minded people. He joined the US military as an intelligence analyst. Jackson has said that he wanted to kill black people for a very, very long time, specifically black men. He said, and I quote, "I figured I would end up getting shot by the police, kill myself, or end up in jail." In regards to white supremacy, Jackson has said, quote, "The white race is being eroded. No one cares about you. The Chinese don't care about you. The blacks don't care about you." And for those unaware in the audience, the sentiments that Jackson is expressing is specifically a deceitful white supremacist conspiracy theory referred to as white genocide, which is a belief that white people are going extinct due to there being less birth rates of white people, in which their conclusion is that white people need to kill all non-white people before it's too late. And given that whiteness was specifically created as a class system to justify enslavement and the commodification of people of color throughout the rise of colonialism, it doesn't take too much time to ponder before you come to the conclusion that this is a whack job conspiracy theory. And on that front, Jackson was not a fan of race mixing, which is about as old school as racism can get. He also had a YouTube channel which promoted neo-Nazi and alt-right sentiments of Holocaust denialism, praised Donald Trump, and other white nationalist content, including MGTOW, or Men Going Their Own Way, which is an offshoot of incels that can be basically summed up as a bunch of fucking crybaby men who can't get laid because feminism exists. Cry me a fucking river, oh my god. So obviously the seeds were already planted for this guy to commit a terrorist attack. And that's what he did on March 20th, killing Timothy Kaufman, a 66-year-old black man whose fucking crime against humanity was collecting cans outside of Hell's Kitchen. Jackson approached Kaufman and stabbed him multiple times with a fucking sword, which is the most small dick energy I've ever read about a racist white supremacist who can't get pussy. Jackson was charged with 3 counts of criminal possession of a weapon, second-degree murder as a hate crime, and first and second-degree murder as an act of terrorism. He was sentenced to life in prison without parole. On January 29, 2017, in Quebec City, although it's not in the US, but it's like roughly 100 miles from the border, Alexander Bissonnette brought a gun to the Islamic Cultural Center in Quebec City, which is a mosque, and he opened fire for 2 minutes with a 99mm Glock pistol, killing 6 worshippers and seriously injuring 5 other people. Bissonnette told police that he was motivated by Justin Trudeau's response to Donald Trump's travel ban, and that refugees were gonna kill his family. Also, I don't mean to whip out Godwin's law about Donald Trump or anything, but the man sure is coming up a lot in this section of the video. I wonder why.
A globalist is a person that wants the globe to do well, frankly, not caring about our country so much. And you know what? We can't have that. You know, they have a word. It sort of became old-fashioned. It's called a nationalist. And I say, really, we're not supposed to use that word. You know what I am? I'm a nationalist, okay?
Bissonnette was given a life sentence in prison with no parole for at least 40 years. He appealed for parole from the Canadian Supreme Court, and now he can apply for parole in 25 years because 40 years with no parole for killing innocent people was just too much for the poor guy. On May 26, 2017, racist ass clown Jeremy Joseph Christian, for fuck's sake, that's the worst name I've ever read out loud in my life, began shouting racist and anti-Muslim slurs at 2 black teenagers who were just riding the train in Portland, Oregon. Christian was not happy about being told that he was being racist, so he did what any racist would predictably do, and he began stabbing people on the train, killing 2 people and seriously injuring 1 person who survived. Christian is a self-described white nationalist and harbored supremacist views and has a history of committing other crimes, including kidnapping and robbery. Christian was a huge fan of neo-Nazis and anti-Semitic content. His social media posts were often contradictory, where he would grow an affinity for both Bernie Sanders and Donald Trump, although he did not vote for either one of them. In April of 2017, Christian stated, "I just challenged Ben Ferencz to a debate in The Hague with Putin as our judge. I will defend the Nazis and he will defend the Ashkenazis." Which, oh my god, that is the most cringe sentence I've ever read. If you don't know why that's cringe, first of all, Ben Ferencz is currently, as of writing this, the last living Nuremberg prosecutor for the crimes committed by Nazis in Germany, and Ashkenazi is Eastern European Jews. Christian even has the hots for Timothy McVeigh, the man behind the Oklahoma bombing, the deadliest domestic terrorist attack in US history. Fun fact, Timothy McVeigh frequently sold copies of the Turner Diaries, which is a 1978 novel that fetishizes a violent revolution which consisted of overthrowing the US government and a violent race war, which would eventually lead to the extermination of Jews, quote-unquote liberal actors, politicians, and other non-whites to be exterminated en masse. Holy shit, what a rabbit hole I just went down. Anyway, Christian was given 2 life sentences for each murder and an additional 51.5 years for related charges. And I saved the one most important 2017 terrorist attack for last, and I feel that this one is crucial. It really stands out from the rest of them. I'm gonna drive my point home all the fucking way with this one. There is no way, absolutely no fucking way, that Critical can say
This article really sums up 2017 nicely
without being fully aware of this specific incident. We're gonna get real fucking grim here, folks. In Charlottesville, Virginia, there was a proposal to remove a statue of the Confederate General Robert E. Lee, which, if you need a reminder of what he was fighting for as a Confederate general, he was fighting for so-called states' rights. States' rights to do what exactly? Legalize and enforce slavery. Anyway, various hate groups from the area as well as all over the country took offense to the idea of removing a statue of a man who fought to maintain slavery, so they organized a rally called Unite the Right at Lee Park in August of 2017 that consisted of neo-Confederates, outspoken fascists, white nationalists, neo-Nazis, and other various far-right militia groups, who all just mainly consist of the same type of people who believe in all that other crazy white supremacist conspiracy theories that we just observed in the previous examples. It cannot be understated what happened on this day. The Virginia governor declared a state of fucking emergency, stating that without additional powers, the public safety would not be ensured. Police also declared the event as unlawful, and that's about as productive and helpful as they ever were at that event because the violence would ensue. The one part that I think hurts the most to talk about is we can't ignore when talking about this day was the terrorist attack committed by James Alex Field Jr., a man who would draw swastikas in his school binder, and he would talk about Adolf Hitler endlessly, madly in love with the guy ever since early middle school. His teachers in the high school would talk about how he was just all about Adolf Hitler and white supremacy, and that he was so fucking horny for the Nazis.
I mean, he had some very radical views on race. He was very infatuated with the Nazis, with Adolf Hitler. He also had a huge military history, especially with like German military history in World War II. But he was pretty infatuated with that stuff. You know, his freshman year, he had an issue with that was raised, and from there on, we knew that, he had these issues. I developed a good rapport with him, and I used that rapport to constantly try to steer him away from those beliefs, to show clear examples, why that thinking is wrong, why their beliefs were evil, things like that.
Now, of course, the family moved from the Florence, Boone County area up to the Toledo area.
Hey, wait a minute, my grandfather is from there. No wonder they both turned out so horrible. Although during the rally he was holding a Vanguard America shield, Vanguard America, which is a neo-Nazi group that is part of the Nationalist Front, has denounced that Field was part of their group. It's unknown as to whether or not this denouncement was used as a means to avoid prosecution, but that is what they said. So, at about 1:45 p.m. Eastern Time during the Unite the Right rally, Fields drove his fucking car through a crowd of peaceful protesters chanting slogans of working class solidarity. 35 people were injured and 1 person was killed, being Heather Heyer, an anti-fascist. Later on in that day, then President Donald Trump went on national television and called the people at the rally very fine people on both sides.
But you also had people that were very fine people on both sides. You had people in that group, excuse me, I saw the same pictures as you did. You had people in that group that were there to protest the taking down of, to them, a very, very important statue and the renaming of a park from Robert E. Lee to another name.
Overall, just so incredibly sad.
I think that it speaks volumes that the attack that I just described that took place, injuring so many people, and the mother of Heather Heyer had said that she didn't want people to hate Alex Fields. I don't know. I don't think I would do the same. I don't think I would express the same sentiment, whether it is Heather Heyer's words or her mother's for that matter. I think I would be so drowned in the fact that my daughter just died to a fucking Nazi. And it's not like those parents didn't receive death threats after the fact. They totally fucking did, which is real fucking nice when you have a daughter who just died and then you have to deal with the fucking grieving fucking agony of receiving death threats because a white supremacist killed your daughter.
This article really sums up 2017 nicely.
Kind of like when Alex Jones was spreading conspiracy theories about the Sandy Hook shooting, and then all of those parents were receiving a bunch of fucking death threats as well. Throughout this section of the video, I have mentioned the prison sentences, the persecutions, and all that, of these terrible people who have committed terrible and heinous acts of violence upon their own communities, or communities that aren't even theirs. And all of this is done in the name of white supremacy and the hatred of Jews, the hatred of black people, the hatred of the LGBT, etc., on and on and on and on. And yes, even Alex Field got a life sentence with an additional 419 years on top of that for all of the people that he has hurt and injured. But I hate to say this, I don't think that matters, Critical. Regardless of the punishments that these fucking awful people received after they have committed these terrible acts of evil, the pain is still inflicted on the community. Like, people have been injured, people have died, people's entire families have been absolutely butchered and destroyed, broken apart from these hateful fucking people.
All parents want their children to be part of this utopia where unicorns are pissing out rainbows and the rainbows are shitting out flowers and the flowers are getting bukkakied by butterflies. Perfect world, nothing ever goes wrong. No one gets hurt, there's no boo-boos.
And I even spoke about how some of these people have been harboring hateful, racist, and anti-Semitic beliefs since they were children.
Oh, if you catch your kid watching Paw Patrol or Thomas the Tank Engine, it's already too late. You might as well just put the child down. They've already become Hitler.
I know that some people are gonna just say that the prosecution matters because now we will have less people like them on the streets doing these acts of terrorism. But at some point you gotta ask yourself that if this post-terrorism form of prosecution is really doing anything, why aren't we seeing a decline in terrorism? So for those who don't know, I am a police and prison abolitionist, and I talk extensively about this topic on my channel. I even have an entire playlist of videos that you can watch on this subject in the description if you're interested. And one thing that I've learned in my 31 years of living on this planet is that policing doesn't prevent terrorism, right? Like, with all of the advanced counter-terrorism measures and funding that we give to our police, we're not seeing a decline in terrorism. Like, we really aren't. In fact, the data contradicts that. The data shows that terrorism committed by extremists are going up steadily, more so, as well as the funding. Someone in the comments section might argue that the police needs to be there to protect us from future acts of terror committed by these evil fucking people. Hell, I can even see Critical making this argument on like a live stream or something, responding to this video. Maybe, I don't know. I'm not making assumptions here. Okay, I am making assumptions. But let's go back to Jeremy Joseph Christian. None of what I'm about to say is an attempt to justify his actions, but to kind of put ourselves in his shoes for a second. It was revealed in his trial that Christian was actually looking into getting some mental health treatment for his mental illnesses. Now, granted, his attacks on the people that he hurt that day was specifically racist, and it was not fueled by any form of emotional disturbance of any kind. And plus, the whole, like, the shooter was mentally ill argument is never really used in a way for some kind of restorative justice or anything like that. It's obviously used as a ploy to get a less harsh sentence, and I can kind of see that being done with this person as well, considering that this person was a huge Timothy McVeigh fan. Oh god, wow. But I think that this still, in spite of all of this, speaks volumes about our society and how our society views policing. Because policing, as we've seen over time, doesn't mean safety of the general public. It doesn't ensure that. And that's weird because the police is very often portrayed that way, right? Like, they are seen as purveyors of safety and good when they have contradicted that notion several times. But the point that I'm trying to make here, specifically in this section of the video, is that while we don't have a meaningful answer for those who are struggling with mental health issues, more importantly for this video, we don't have an answer for those who fall down the rabbit hole of fascist and white supremacist indoctrination. We don't have a resolution for this kind of thing. We see a repetitious pattern of white supremacist terrorism, and it's steadily increasing. We don't have an answer for that. We don't have like a systemic solution for that. Especially white supremacists who fall down this rabbit hole at such an early age. And I think that's the most concerning. This would be a really cool segue for us to start talking about Thomas the Tank Engine and Paw Patrol. Even though I don't like CNN, I think that the premise of this article isn't bad on its own. I think that it's acceptable to at least pursue an understanding as to the content that your children are watching. I think the first thing I need to say about that is holy shit. I don't know where that spider went, but there was a fucking spider on me. Holy shit. Holy shit. It's gone. Well then. Okay. That was a legitimate spider just like crawling on me. Holy shit. That wasn't even a bit. That was like actually a thing that happened in my video while recording. Remember when Critical had a spider somewhere in one of his streams?
Last night I was ambushed. It was a surprise attack that I never saw coming.
Sorry, the audio was peaking. You're welcome.
No, not now! No, there's a wasp!
Luckily I maintained my cool and didn't panic. I grabbed the closest thing I could find, a pink ukulele, and then I run into my bathroom and give it to Tiana, because I was too fucking afraid to do it. So Tiana takes the pink ukulele and clobbers him with it. There you can see the blood of that heathen right there.
Firstly, no one's really considering Thomas and Paw Patrol to be boogeymen.
She says this with such confidence that it's common knowledge that parents are afraid of Thomas the Tank Engine and Paw Patrol like it's some type of modern-day boogeyman.
One of the articles that Alyssa cites makes a reference to the sad story of Henry.
Critical, have you ever heard of the sad story of Henry?
No, I haven't. Can you tell me about it, please? Because I never watched Thomas in my life.
Yeah, that's valid as fuck. Anyway, we're gonna talk about the sad story of Henry then, because there's some underlying themes in that story that I think are worth diving into with a magnifying glass. Alright, let's do it. So, starting with Thomas, the story centers around Thomas, the tank engine, on a fictional island called the Island of Sodor. The story of Thomas originates from the Railway series, a collection of stories written by Reverend Wilbur Awdry. He wrote these stories originally for his son, Christopher Audrey, who was sick with measles. Christopher was only 2 years old at this point in his life, so his father told him stories and nursery rhymes to cheer him up. One of these rhymes went as followed. Once an engine attached to a train was afraid of a few drops of rain. It went into a tunnel and squeaked through its funnel and never came out again. I bring this up because it was one of his son's favorite rhymes. His son deeply appreciated it, and at the age of 2, which helped him overcome his battle against measles, which is a miracle. Having to lose your child to a sickness like that can be devastating. So, the nursery rhymes and stories that Wilbert Audrey told his sons are extremely significant and symbolic to Christopher's recovery. It is unknown where the specific rhyme that I just told originated from, but in a letter that Christopher received, it made the claim that it took influence from a children's book published in 1902, which went something like this. Once an engine, when fixed to a train, was alarmed by a few drops of rain, so went puff from its funnel and fled to a tunnel and would not come out again. Regardless of the origin, this is where we begin connecting the dots here. In both poems, we notice that this limerick isn't exactly political in nature. There isn't much of any claim of such a thing in the text. All this unnamed train wanted was just to not get wet. Now, if you've seen the Thomas the Tank Engine show before, you can relate this to Season 1, where Henry notices some raindrops and decides to hide in the tunnel. This is the first time in the entire series where we get 2 back-to-back episodes to explain a plot, a story. But why does it do this? In episode 3, which is the first part of this particular story aptly called The Sad Story of Henry, the narrator, voiced by Ringo Starr in the UK, or George Carlin in the US.
Bullshit is the glue that binds us as a nation. Where would we be without our safe, familiar American bullshit? Land of the free, home of the brave, the American dream. All men are equal, justice is blind, the press is free, your vote counts.
Recites the aforementioned poem as a plot device for the purpose of setting the scene.
Once, an engine attached to a train was afraid of a few drops of rain. It went into a tunnel and squeaked through its funnel and wouldn't come out again.
Now, if the episode ended here, it would have been far too short of an already short episode, so the makers of the show had to think of something that could make this poem more episodic. Naturally, they made the passengers, and arguably the main villain, Sir Topham Hatt, react to Henry remaining in the tunnel. To the episode's credit, there is a very hilarious scene where the passengers are pulling and pushing the train, and Sir Topham Hatt is literally standing on a wooden block ordering the passengers to push and pull, as if they are his henchmen. He is seen counting on 3 for when these passengers are pushing and pulling. It is extremely comical on purpose, which I will explain why that is in a minute. Even Thomas himself is seen trying to push Henry out of the tunnel, but he barely nudges Henry like a few inches. All Henry does is remain seated, blowing steam at his driver and Sir Topham Hatt, and argues that the rain will spoil his paint. It's clear that Henry isn't going to move, so at long last, Sir Topham Hatt doesn't get his way. He orders a bunch of workers to remove the rails in front of Henry and builds a wall in front of the exit of the tunnel. This is where episode 3 ends, which leads into episode 4, titled Edward, Gordon, and Henry. In this episode, it begins with Gordon pulling coaches full of very important people, including Sir Topham Hatt. Gordon is prideful of his work because of the length of the train and the people he is carrying. Gordon is very comically full of himself and egotistical, seeing himself as prideful above the other trains. The music used for Gordon is triumphant, almost like Gordon is a superhero who just threw on a cape and it's about to go fight bad guys or something. It's almost like Gordon believes that his dick is huge or something. Okay, I'm just exaggerating for comedic effect, so forgive me. Eventually, they cross Henry, where Gordon degrades him, blowing steam at Henry, or in Gordon's words, pooping at Henry. And eventually, Gordon bursts his safety valve, forcing him to stop pulling his train. So Topham Hatt responds to this by saying that he never liked big engines and orders another engine to finish pulling the train at once. This is a huge blow to Gordon's ego, considering that Sir Topham Hatt probably purposed him for pulling VIP coaches. Henry is in the tunnel, amused at the situation, so they place Gordon at the sideline and attempt to get Edward, one of the oldest engines on the island, to try to pull the train, but even he was unable to push the train due to its weight. And Sir Topham Hatt, with his hands completely tied with no other choice, he finally gives Henry the offer to pull the train. And at the end of the episode of this two-parter, Sir Topham Hatt promises Henry a fresh new coat of green paint. Now, this two-parter did originate from a poem that only covers the first few seconds of this entire story. So what else did we learn in this serialized edition of this story? Well, firstly, we are introduced to a character called Sir Topham Hatt. This is the very first time we meet him in the entire series. Earlier I said that Sir Topham Hatt is arguably the antagonist of this story, and that's because of a few factors. Firstly, this character is not referred to kindly by the narrator or even the other engines in the series. I don't endorse fat shaming, but he is referred to as the fat controller for a reason, and it's constant.
Then, along came Sir Topham Hatt, the man in charge of all the engines on Sodor. They call him the Fat Controller.
More so than he is referred to as Sir Topham Hatt, which is his official title. The scene where Sir Topham Hatt is ordering passengers to push and pull, as silly as it was, is symbolic, because he isn't one of these people pushing and pulling the train out of the tunnel. He says, "My doctor has forbidden me to pull," which it's kind of absurd, right? I mean, what about the passengers? Are they all suddenly able-bodied in comparison to Sir Topham Hatt? This isn't particularly a commentary on Sir Topham Hatt's physical abilities, but his social abilities. Like, he owns the railway. He can afford to have people push and pull the train on his behalf. I mean, the people pushing and pulling the train defeats the purpose of having a train in the first place. Then Henry is imprisoned inside of the tunnel he is hiding in, with Sir Topham Hatt completely washing his hands of Henry. And in episode 4, when Gordon's safety valve blew up, he devalues Gordon and orders other engines to be fetched. And only when he has no other choice, he resurrects Henry and gives him what he asked for. Also, why didn't Gordon get his safety valve checked before pulling a big train? Were there no safety regulations or checking procedures in place to prevent that kind of thing from happening? In the perspective of Sir Topham Hatt, Gordon, Henry, hilariously the passengers, and arguably all of the other engines and workers on the island of Sodor are disposable to him. Now, some people may feel that Henry is the villain of the story, or that Henry is the person that is said to be, quote-unquote, learning a lesson here. This is reinforced by the final line said in episode 3, where the narrator says,
"But I think he deserved his punishment." don't you?
This is the narrator, not specifically Ringo Starr or George Carlin, giving an opinion of the situation Henry is in. Even though the narrator speaks unfavorably of Sir Topham Hatt, he still thinks that Henry got what he deserved for disobeying Sir Topham Hatt. But is that really the lesson here? Is the lesson really to obey authority?
Definitely. Maybe. I have to think about it.
Well, maybe it is, and I'm sure that's what the writers wanted it to be. But I think we need to further contextualize the story a little further. You see, throughout the story, trains do manual labor. They are pulling heavy coaches full of people for several dozen and possibly hundreds of miles. They shunt cars, organizing them, gathering coal, transporting goods. This isn't even covering the very dangerous conditions that the trains are usually faced with, which, again, they have sentience and consciousness. They are able to perceive and experience things. They're able to feel tired, hurt, injured, refreshed, and they even sleep. So, if we contextualize that notion with the fact that Sir Topham Hatt owns these railways and governs these trains, we can see that Sir Topham Hatt isn't just some really mean villain with no consideration for others. He is a capitalist. If we are to assert that Thomas has a political undertone by any stretch, we need to understand that the engines, along with their drivers and firemen, are working class people, and Sir Topham Hatt, being the capitalist, is the sole ownership of the means of production on the island of Sodor, which is a dictatorship. Hey, kind of a random thought, but can you imagine Sir Topham Hatt calling in the fucking Pinkertons to take care of Henry and his strike? I don't know why, but that's just a little fucking too real for me right there. But keep in mind that this is what would have happened to Henry if he tried something like this in real life. This is why, of course, you should unionize in your workplace. But I digress. So, with everything considered, this story of Henry in the tunnel is a story about Henry going on strike against Sir Topham Hatt and his rail line. While we do get to hear the reason for Henry's protests in the tunnel, we don't get to see Sir Topham Hatt potentially neglecting to give Henry a fresh new coat of paint when asked for one. Side note, while it may be true that the moral of the story is to obey authority, Henry still won in the end. Henry going on strike got him his paint job, even though he went through so much. I think in a way it makes the story kind of beautiful because it makes Henry an inspiration for others to go on strike when they are faced with unfair working conditions. Some people may argue that a paint job is simply an aesthetic and that Henry needs to work for something as frivolous as a paint job. But who is saying that Henry never worked a day in his life? Maybe Henry has never gotten a paint job after he was initially built. Maybe Henry notices the other engines who don't work as hard as he does getting paint jobs on a regular basis. We don't know this, and yet we're not given the chance to know this. So when the narrator says, "But I think he deserves his punishment, don't you?"
Yeah, that is kind of an assumption, or rather an assertion. We don't know what Henry's motivations are for him to have these demands. He's a worker, and the workers need to have solid working conditions in order for them to thrive. Otherwise, they're just squeezing themselves under the boot of the capitalist system. And furthermore, when we have the story framed this way, it robs our ability to see why Henry has these motivations in the first place.
Because at the end of episode 4, it is told to Henry that all he has to do is ask his driver to wipe him down. But then you gotta ask the question, why didn't Sir Topham Hatt just tell him to say that to his driver? Let alone, why didn't Sir Topham Hatt just give him the paint job after he was done pulling the coaches? Why did Sir Topham Hatt let Henry unnecessarily hold the passengers there in the middle of nowhere? Do you think Henry really has a vendetta against the passengers? Well, no. He very clearly stated that he was worried about his paint job. So if the story sounds very simplistic, that's because it is intentionally set up that way, but not for the reason you'd think. Heavy stories can be explored in children's media, especially situations like when suicide is addressed in Tom and Jerry, or when school shootings is addressed in Static Shock. I think that the argument that children's media, especially Thomas the Tank Engine, is somehow mindless and without conflict is laughably false, especially given the third and fourth episode of the series revolving around a striking worker, even hissing steam at his own boss. Are workers going on strike somehow not political? So critical, do you now see how there may be some political undertones in television shows that kids watch, even though that it might not be blatantly obvious to you?
Man, why you gotta make everything so political? I'm just trying to enjoy Thomas for the first time. You're here just like making it all like anarchy or whatever.
Fuck this. Sorry, Skylar. You're on your own.
Oh shit. You annoy the ever-living fuck out of George Carlin. That's not a good sign, Critical.
I think the big takeaway from this section of the video was that Thomas and his friends play specific roles with each other, and it boils down to how they interact with one another. Whether it be one of them sizing themselves up to another coworker, or whether it be an employer making their workers work under shitty working conditions. These people, and yes, I am calling the trains people because they have sentience in this universe. They're not really like friends, they're not comrades really, they're not even really like a family, unless you ask a human resources department what they define a family to be as. It would be too long for me to get really deep into it, but labor history shows a trend of antagonism between one class to another, and in this case, it is the rich expropriating the means of production from the poor. See, there's that word again, means of production. I know I'm bringing Marxian theory into this, I'm sorry, but listen, you don't need to read Karl Marx's Capital to understand what is in the book. If you've had to spend most of your waking hours at a shitty job just to be able to put food on the table, just to barely have a roof over your head, then you don't need to read Marx's book, Capital. No, instead, you have the marks of capital on your fucking body. And for what it is worth, most workers, if they're being honest with themselves, understand that their surplus value is being robbed from them by their employers. Which makes sense as to why some trains in Thomas the Tank Engine, as well as the narrator, do not like Sir Topham Hatt.
This is my railway, and I give the order.
With Sir Topham Hatt giving the train sentience, what is his justification for owning the means of production? Well, if you're a train and you do your job well, you get called a really useful engine, or in trans girl terms, you get called a good girl.
You are a really useful engine. 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 You really are a useful engine.
But if you do a bad job, then you get scrapped, which has implications.
Listen to me. There is nothing wrong with that tunnel. You stuck in it because you tried to do rock and roll. Tunnels are not dance floors, and you are not a pop star. The fat controller gave his full attention to Duncan's funnel. If it happens again, he ended ominously, I shall find ways to cut you down to size. In other words, your career is on the line.
I thought this was a kid's show.
It's fucking sad when the children in this story
are smarter than the author. The children can look at the show and take it at face value the way it's supposed to be taken and recognize these characters aren't evil megalomaniac neo-colonial autocrats or shit like that. They're plot devices.
Thank goodness. I'm Oliver, and I'm with my brake van toad. We've run out of coal and have no more steam. But what are you doing? Escaping from what? Scrap? Douglas shivered.
The children can look at the show and take it at face value.
And no, I'm not being off base here. There's racism within Thomas the Tank Engine. Look at this whole bunch of episodes where Duck absolutely has it out for Diesel, and Diesel hasn't even done anything wrong yet. Now, of course, Diesel would do something wrong later in the show. I'm not going to really get into that, but what's more important here is that Duck automatically hates Diesel, and Diesel just showed up. In fact, Duck hates Diesel so fucking much that in Season 4, Duck went on strike.
What's all this? Demanded the Fat Controller. We're on strike, sir, said Percy. He said it! He said it! Yes, added Duck. Beg pardon, sir, but we won't work with Diesel, sir. There it is!
The show is racist. It's just clearly racist. The show has an entire class of people that are known as Diesels, and Diesels are generally portrayed in a very, very similar light to blackface. In fact, Diesels aren't treated very well in general.
An angry farmer was telling Mavis just what she could do with her train.
Holy shit, that's a fucking threat right there. Can you imagine if these trains and firemen and drivers got together and they conducted a strike? And I mean a general strike. Solidarity with railroad workers, with Sir Topham Hatt being the sole ownership of the means of production, having a monopoly on the railroad. He would call the police and summon the Pinkertons. Historically, when general strikes happen, the police and the Pinkertons are called for such an event. This is used primarily to disperse a strike or to infiltrate and sabotage a strike. Speaking of the police, let's talk about
Paw Patrol will be there on the double.
Listen, I just need to be upfront for a second here. I don't like Paw Patrol at all. I just don't. Because Paw Patrol is so bad. If I had to describe it in a few short words, imagine if you were watching Sonic X, but instead of Sonic the Hedgehog being the main character, it was Christopher Thorndike who is the main character, and instead of all the other characters that surround Christopher Thorndike, it was just dogs. That's what this show is, and that's why it's bad. I am a police abolitionist, I am a prison abolitionist, and I do have my grievances against this show. But this show fundamentally sucks. With Thomas the Tank Engine, I can at least enjoy parts of it, if not only based on nostalgia. I wouldn't be able to watch the newer CGI episodes, just because it's not something I would be invested in. I like the older show because they had these train models, and they shot these train models in such a way to make the action scenes look as realistic as possible. Like, yes, I know that these are just trains. I know that these are just models, but these are really shot really well. Some of these moments are just absolutely beautiful, pleasing on the eyes. But with Paw Patrol, this is like one of those really, really, really shitty cartoons from the last decade. I mean, it kind of just is. It also just feels like Sonic X once more because Chase is blue, and Chase is the main character other than Ryder. In fact, it makes me not want to watch Sonic X ever again, because that's probably why I fucking hate this show so much on an intimate level. I hate this show. Okay, now that we've got the subjective part out of the way, let's start talking about why I really don't like this show. Where are Ryder's parents? That's a good first question to open this with.
Hi, I'm Kristen Bell, and I am here to spread the good news about Paw Patrol to fellow parents. Come on. Hey, Susan! Remember me? I'm the one that was talking about being a paw rent at Caleb's soccer match last week.
Yeah, that's how I almost missed him score the winning goal.
Well, clear your afternoon and also the next 5 years because the Paw Patrol years are here.
Karen, get off my fucking lawn. Is Ryder supposed to be chaperoned by the dogs, or is Ryder chaperoning the dogs? It actually seems like Ryder is chaperoning the fucking mayor of the town.
He almost runs off the road. He's hanging, he's dangling off the bridge, and he looks at this guy, and you think that this guy's gonna call 911. The guy's even saying, help me, call the authorities, call somebody.
Good morning there, friend. Call the police, call the fire department, call everybody. Here, we call the Paw Patrol.
What the f? Looks like you're in a predicament. Yeah, so you better call the guy. This is the only time you hear a black man say, you better call the goddamn police. And they're like, no, man, we're gonna call the Paw Patrol. And my man is thinking like they're gonna, like, what are you gonna call the K9 unit of the police?
Yeah, the dog division.
Yeah.
I've never been to Adventure Bay, but maybe this is what you call your police force.
Yeah, exactly.
In Paw Patrol, Ryder owns the means of production, which means he has control over the police and various other industries throughout Adventure Bay. So before we get any further into this, it just needs to be emphasized that this character, who is a fucking kid, has no parents around him. And that's a little alarming, because if he did have parents, then how rich are his fucking parents? Like, imagine if one of the parents was a CEO of a major corporation and the other parent was the mayor of a major huge city like New York City or Los Angeles, and for shits and giggles, they give Ryder a fucking town to govern over as a kid. How old is he? 5? 10? Oh shit, he's actually 10 years old. One of Critical's points in his video is that Alyssa doesn't seem to understand the characters and why the characters are so likable.
This is very tempting for us intellectual parents who are aghast at contemporary politics as she takes a sip from her coffee mug in front of a fireplace with an open robe, and just really goes on, this is a source of comfort for our children, but it shouldn't be because these shows are evil. Apparently the possibility that kids are just watching these shows because they're colorful and the characters are cool since it's a fucking train and it's fucking dogs, both of which kids like. They like fucking dog. Well, they don't like fucking dogs.
That's no good.
But they like the fucking characters. It's cool to them. And this idea has just eluded Alyssa that kids aren't watching these shows based on any type of underlying messages, and I don't think they're being subliminally conditioned to want to start throwing up concentration camps or some shit. I don't think Alyssa was ever even a kid. I think she was just a robot designed to be outraged by everything and look for meaning where there is none. And if I'm wrong, Alyssa, feel free to try and prove me wrong, but I think I know what kind of kid you were. You were probably the type of kid to remind the teacher of homework if she forgot, and you probably told your parents that Santa Claus wasn't real because you didn't want to have any fun on the holidays, didn't want to be deceived by the fascist notion of Santa Claus existing.
What Critical doesn't seem to do here is really answer that question for himself. See, the reason why these characters are so likable is primarily because they have a merchandise line that they have to sell. Both of these shows participate in the selling of merch for their shows, and they're not the only ones to do this. Whether it be Pokemon, Digimon, Transformers, Sonic, Ninja Turtles, Super Mario Bros., Kirby, My Little Pony, Care Bears, or even Dick fucking Tracy, most kids shows don't get airtime unless there's a financial incentive behind it, being selling of merchandise. Of course, things are a little different now, considering that DVDs and VHSs are no longer in circulation as much as they used to be, so now they sell stream services. And the toys give the kids an emotional connection with the show. I played a lot of Yu-Gi-Oh! As a kid. I also, myself, had an emotional connection with my Yu-Gi-Oh! Cards. Even as a kid, I watched Thomas, and I had an emotional connection with Thomas due to the fact that I had my own wooden models of some of these trains. But what Critical doesn't seem to understand here is that these characteristics within these shows don't just exist within a vacuum. Even as a kid, I picked up on the themes that were being explored within the shows. For example, I started by shonen jumping my way into the 4Kids version of One Piece. Now, of course, in hindsight, I understand that this version of the show is inferior by a large margin here, but I still got into it because of this show. As a kid, this show made me go on the internet and seek out poorly translated fan translations of the manga. I can understand the themes that are going on within the show, even at that age. And we have to talk about how the police are represented in media. Another CNN article that is much more interesting than the one Alyssa wrote. It says, in the fall 2019 lineup, we calculated that more than 60% of primetime dramas on the main 4 broadcast networks NBC, CBS, ABC, and Fox were shows about crime, the police, and the legal system. And even if it is CNN saying it, it's still something worth discussing, and I think that is a legitimate point to bring up the questioning of authority within law enforcement. The University of Utah of Law has stated that law enforcement only solve 2% of crime, and a lot of the crime that we are talking about here are ones that can be prevented with a better structured society. And even though I don't like Paw Patrol, I can imagine that kids can pick up on the tropes that are being explored within the show, even to this very day. Kids are not stupid, they are developing. They are looking at the world that they are born into, forming their own opinions about how the world functions. And the one thing that I hate more than anything in the world, anything at all, is when adults try to program kids to not question authority. This type of egregious form of programming is more common within religious circles because their recruitment for their cults are children. And that's where we gotta start asking questions here. We tend to find religious content to be sort of a meme. We spoof on it from time to time. It's fun.
You're practically my best singer. What could you possibly be afraid of?
That mean man is following me. I think he's a pedophile.
No! I just want to get my dolly back.
And even occasionally, people from that very faith will also spoof on it because they realize it's an outdated way of recruiting new members. And in a way, whether or not you like admitting it, this show, Paw Patrol, is a form of recruitment for children to become unconditionally loyal to law enforcement. Because yes, this show is about the police. This show is called Paw Patrol, not Paw Patrol plus a worker plus a fireman plus a... You get my point. Chase is deployed the most, which means that as the police, he is the most used in Adventure Bay. Which kind of says something about how we view the police. Right now, there's an ongoing discussion about how the police are not equipped to handle mental health emergencies. Yet the police are used in mental health emergencies, and inappropriately so.
I not only don't want to defund the police, I'm the one calling for $300 million more for local police, for community policing. I also think we should add social workers and psychologists to help police on 911 calls. The only person calling to defund the police is Donald Trump.
Even if you want to say that there are other dogs that do other functions that represent other industries throughout Adventure Bay, it doesn't change the fact that Chase is used in almost every situation, even when Chase isn't needed. Look, maybe I'm looking way too deep into this. Maybe I'm just going bananas. But what Thomas the Tank Engine and Paw Patrol both do is that it shows a governed society where the goal is to maintain the status quo, and the governing force is a private owner. Although that is a subjective way to understand these stories, it is a really good way to analyze how stories are being told to the children. Think of the children, Critical. Think of the children.
I hate to suggest test this, but my guess would be marijuana.
Especially the messages that we're sending to the kids. We have to make sure that the messages are positive and constructive. Listen, I get it, Critical, okay? I get it. Alyssa is not a good political commentator, and she uses a lot of words that kind of just have no meaning behind them. In fact, one of the weaker points of her article is when she describes Sir Topham Hatt from Thomas the Tank Engine as neo-colonial, without really explaining what she means by that, because on the surface, I can kinda see what Alyssa is trying to do here. She's trying to explain that there are some parallels between those universes and our universe. She's trying to explain how there's intersections of oppression within the universes of the shows she's commentating on, and those intersections aren't being meaningfully challenged in those universes, just like they're not meaningfully challenged in our universe. The status quo is never really meaningfully addressed, ever, unless it's done by radical groups. Now, if Critical is going to be the expert authority on how to write a genuinely good op-ed piece, then he should be able to explain that her analysis is very weak in its substance, because she's not explaining what fascism is or how Thomas and Paw Patrol are fascist, but neither is Critical. In fact, Critical only talks about fascism in his hyperbolic improvisation.
Oh, if you catch your kid watching Paw Patrol or Thomas the Tank Engine, it's already too late. You might as well just put the child down. They've already become Hitler. And then she tries to poke a hole in your condom and give you this baby of false knowledge that she's not the only insane person that thinks these shows are divisive. She says prestigious publications have essays on it in social media and it's getting eviscerated by grown-ups on discussion boards. None of those are reliable. The prestigious publication essay she's talking about comes from fucking BuzzFeed. It's not like BuzzFeed is the holy grail of good journalism. They're not like this fucking Excalibur cutting through the bullshit and saving the world of modern journalism.
And I just want to make it clear that I'm not saying that Critical is anti-Semitic. It's not really my call to make, honestly. But what I am saying is that a baseless distrust in the media usually comes from a place of anti-Semitism, especially in regards to fascism or critics of fascism. Because in the 1930s, it was Nazis who distrusted the media because the media, as they believed, was owned by Jews. One example of this is earlier this year noted leftist Vosh.
No way, dog. No way.
Vosh and EJ were having a debate stream about, pretty much Vosh's conduct on Twitter, Twitch, YouTube, his website, whatever other platform Vosh is on for that matter.
The point that I'm at right now is I feel like if you're an ML, it should just be legal to hit you. Registered mental disorder, yeah.
No one really has angels in any circle. Don't let Critical or anyone tell you otherwise. But Vosh was interesting because he decided to bring up this anti-Semitic conspiracy theory.
Like, you have to look at history, right? That's one way that's one way to look at it. So whenever people have been enslaved, if they rise up and use violence to liberate themselves, then that is probably acceptable because they had material conditions in which violence was being, okay, so
like the Nazis?
Rising up against the Nazis was acceptable, yes. The French Resistance.
After World War I, the Nazis claimed that Jewish bankers were holding the country down.
And that was false consciousness because that wasn't actually happening. That was false consciousness.
How can you tell?
They constructed a moral utilitarian rule that did not align with reality, and that's what led them down.
They were not utilitarian. Wait, the Nazis were not utilitarian. Careful with that. They were very, very not utilitarian.
The point is that they were their ideology was not aligned with reality.
How can you tell?
Because Jews don't actually control banks in the world.
There was a disproportionate number of Jewish control of banks in Germany during.
All right, Vosh, we're done here. Thank you. Good.
EJ just noped the fuck out of this debate Because, of course he would. What did you expect him to do? Like, actually entertain the idea that Jews own the banks and Jews own a big cabal of everything that controls everything? That's some weird fucking conspiracy shit. So I want to make it clear that when I talk about critical and I talk about anti-Semitism and distrust of the media, I'm not saying that critical is anti-Semitic. What I am saying, though, is that he contributes to this fear on his platform. First of all, I really just need to make it clear that anti-Semitism has recently been on the rise, specifically because of people who have political platform legitimizing the idea. So far, we have seen an upward trend of people just dismissing these acts of anti-Semitic propaganda as mere memes, just for the lulz. And it's just like, I'm sorry, but there has to come a point where you understand what a dog whistle is. So for the sake of being thorough, let me explain what a dog whistle is. A dog whistle is coded language, or coded symbols. It's a gesture to virtue signal to those who are already in the group. This is a dog whistle. It is just an okay sign, but to certain white supremacist circles, this has specific meanings, meaning white power. Dog whistles and virtue signaling aren't inherently political. In fact, dog whistles and virtue signaling can happen with literally anything, even corporate logos and stuff like that. I even have a Dreamcast logo on my forehead because I'm a fucking huge Dreamcast enthusiast. An example of this being done in anarchist circles is 1312, which basically means all cops are bastards. If you take the numbers and you translate them into letters, and if you translate the letters into words, or if you want to tell kids about it, you can say, all cats are beautiful, which is equally true. All cats are fucking beautiful. And an example of this being done in right-wing circles, especially with numbers and letters, is 1488, which basically is the 14 words, and then there's 88, which basically means I'm on 4chan. You can detect it even from people who are super popular on the platform, including people like PewDiePie. See, most white nationalists are pretty low-key about their white nationalism, and they virtue signal to specific other intentional people for recruitment. He paid with his money dollars and used his money dollars to explain his feelings and stuff. He decided to give money to a freelancing company to do this shit.
I'm sorry. I didn't think they would actually do it. I feel partially responsible, but just I didn't think they would actually do it.
I feel partially responsible.
Do it.
You're not doing dog whistles, you're doing bullhorns, motherfucker! And thus, this behavior led to the severing of ties with him and Disney, as well as being removed from Google Preferred. But he still has his platform, and he still dog whistles occasionally.
What a fucking jeez, oh my god, what the
We still have to deal with the fucking absurdity that is Kanye West and his absolute solidarity with neo-Nazis, his bafflingly cartoonish obsession with going fucking DEFCON 3 on the Jews. And
I see good things about Hitler also. The Jew, I love everyone. I'm done with the classifications. Every human being has something of value that they brought to the table, especially Hitler.
This empowers neo-Nazis, especially in local communities. This is a fucking banner drop over a freeway in Los Angeles. It truly fucking irritates me to a baffling degree that there are people who do not take fascism as a community threat seriously. And if I'm gonna be real fucking honest with you, Critical, your name that is Critical is very unfitting. You do not challenge the conventions of the status quo, especially in this video. I understand that you tend to do a lot of very safe content that is not super controversial, but this shit is so dodging the bullet on every single point that when you do make a point, it's incoherent and baseless.
They look for everything to be controversial and they make everything controversial. It's the stupidest shit in the world. And then they can never understand why people don't take them seriously, and the people that do take them seriously are fucking scary, weird people.
I didn't know it was scary and weird. I think I'm pretty cute. What do you think, Critical? Do you think I'm pretty cute? But to Critical's credit, she's doing a terrible job of explaining what she means. And I mean, she does write for CNN. What can we really expect here? Here's a picture of Alyssa to kind of remind you that even though we are picking apart this person's body of work, we're still picking apart the body of work of a person. This is a person, a human being. And when we contextualize the fact that she is writing articles for parents who raise children, it becomes abundantly clear that Critical, a middle-aged man, is not her target demographic. And I did check. He doesn't have any kids of his own. Neither do I, which is fair. And let me just say something really quick. I would not have made this video if Critical had not said anything about it. There's something purely wholesomely ironic about Critical making a video response to Alyssa's CNN op-ed saying that kids do not think about this kind of stuff. And this CNN article would not have been on my radar had Critical not said anything about it. I would have never made this video response to Critical if he had just seen the article and was like, oh man, what a shitty article. Okay, I'm gonna go do something more important with my life. But no, Critical has very strong feelings about this particular article, which we will talk about why later. But Critical, who doesn't make political or controversially charged videos in the first place, decided to take it upon his own hands to say something about it. And he's not really equipped to do so. He's not media savvy enough to actually analyze this from any political perspective. And thus, here is Alyssa, who is in this position where she can't write a thorough article that goes against the financial interests of the company that is platforming her. It would go against their bread and butter. Of course, none of this is in defense of her shitty article, none of this is in defense of CNN as a whole, but I think we can kind of now see why she's citing various other articles that aren't CNN, while also making no original claims of her own. But the burden of proof is on Critical. He needs to convince Alyssa to make better points throughout her article in terms of how she describes fascism within Thomas the Tank Engine and Paw Patrol. Now, does Critical do anything like that? I'm sorry to say, I don't think Critical fares much better as a person to be eligible to talk about this subject. He's not really challenging anything in the article itself. He doesn't read the articles. He doesn't read further into what the article is trying to say. In fact, he doesn't really bring any other evidence to support his claim with him. You know, he doesn't really make much of a claim back. He just kind of sits there and says, isn't this article absurd? That's his whole video. He doesn't explain why it's absurd. He could have pressed Alyssa for more evidence, for more elaboration on some of the words that she's using, or some of these words in some of the articles that she's reading. It almost feels like he's offended there is even being a question asked about the nature and the tendencies of Thomas and Paw Patrol. That this is even a legitimate talking point in the first place. I think it would be more productive of our time if we looked at some of the sources that Alyssa has highlighted throughout the article.
None of those are reliable.
Alright, so we're gonna actually read through not just this article, but also kind of the different little annotations that were used here. I'm not gonna go through any video links in particular, like this one right here, with some of the other claims that are being made, like pre-modern corporate totalitarian dystopia, imperialist and sinister and sexist, classist and anti-environmentalist and terrible recent data. unstoppable God complex. I'm just going to be looking at the different sources being highlighted here. We'll see what kind of conclusion we can come through it, because I figured that like if other people are writing about this in particular, there must be a reason. They must have like something to say. Let's start with the pre-modern corporate totalitarian dystopia claim. That's an interesting one. So with that said, grab a cold one. I'm drinking an energy drink. Remember when you did that in your QWOP video, Critical? Oh, fucking ad, even though I have ad blocker. Fucking assholes. The repressive authoritarian soul of Thomas the Tank Engine and Friends. And yeah, admittedly, this is a very fucking creepy looking photo. When I was a child, I could spend all day at Shining Time Station, where Thomas the Tank Engine and all of his plate-faded fucking locomotive friends worked and lived. To my undeveloped brain, each episode seemed like a beautiful daydream in which an orderly, magical, trance-inducing universe ticked on under bluebird skies. This section of the article so far kind of reinforces Critical's point a little bit, because this is talking about how like this show was, you know, something that this author watched as a kid, and he also kind of just like was very oblivious to some undertones as well, and it seems like that's what he's going to get into. The show, which included segments that had first aired on a British show called Thomas and Friends, began airing on PBS in 1989, and each episode opened with a Joe Cocker-ish theme song. Reach for the stream, reach for the whistle, go anywhere the railroad runs. Reach for the words, reach for the story, follow the rainbow sun. So the Shining Time Station. I'm sorry. Yeah, I watched it too as a kid, I know. I am having fun. It's okay. We're allowed to have fun. We're allowed to have fun, right, Critical? How could I possibly have imagined that decades later I would get lost in obscure corners of the internet where people interpret the show at length as a depiction of pre-modern corporate totalitarian dystopia? See, there's the fucking claim right there. If you have watched the series and not encountered such readings of it, you may assume that these interpretations are ridiculous. In that case, you should spend 4 minutes with the sad story of Henry. This part of the article is wrong. It is the 3rd episode, unless they're talking about PBS, which in that case, I'm not sure when that episode syndicated on PBS specifically, but in the order in which they appear in the season, it is the 3rd episode, not the 2nd episode. Henry the curmudgeonly.
I'm sure all of you out there have at least a 3rd grade reading level.
How do you fucking say that?
Curmudgeonly.
Curmudgeonly, okay. Henry the curmudgeonly train is afraid to come out of his tunnel because, okay, we've already fucking, like, literally fucking went over this. We don't need to go over this again. It's clear that Audrey disliked change, venerated order, and craved the administration of punishment. Henry wasn't the only train that received a death sentence. In episode 1, a manager tells a show-off engine named Smudger that he's going to make himself useful at last, and then turns Smudger into a generator, never to move again. Yeah, I remember that episode.
Until one day, manager said he was going to make him useful at last. Smudger stopped laughing then. Why? What did he do? He turned him into a generator. He's still there behind our shed. He'll never move again. After that, Stewart and Falcon became really useful engines.
That is a weird episode. It is actually really fucking horrifying. Though Shining Time Station ended in the 90s, Thomas Tank Engine shows have aired almost continuously since. In 2014, the actor who voiced Thomas for the previous 5 years quit, saying that the successful show was exploiting him by paying, quote, a very low wage. The trains seemed overdue for a similar revolution. Okay, whoa. I went into this not knowing this. Oh, no. For the last 5 years, it's been my great honor and pleasure to create the American voices of Thomas the Tank Engine and Percy. Unfortunately, I must now quit the show. It is embarrassing, but the reason is that they are paying very low wages. Terms they are offering are so poor, and this with the immense success of Thomas, that the only right thing for me to do is to walk away. I have felt exploited for a while now. I believe it is important to move on from a situation if you are not valued. As an actor, you start off, and the first season is supposed to be survival money. The second season, you're supposed to get a raise. The third season, it's supposed to be commensurate with what happens to the show. Hit Entertainment, which also owns Bob the Builder and Bonnie the Dinosaur, Angelica Ballerina, and Mike the Knight, was sold to Mattel in October 2011 for $680 million. Thomas the Tank Engine is by far its most valuable property. Critical, listen, we've been talking a lot about exploitation of workers in this video. This is just, oh my god, the alarm bells are going off here. There is something rotten on the island of Sodor, home to Thomas Tank Engine. Viewers won't find guns, violence, or anything even approaching a double entendre. There's none of the blatant racism in early Disney Song of the South, or religion delivered through talking produce as in VeggieTales, yet something about Thomas and Friends give liberal parents the creeps. For example, in 2009, academic Shauna Wilton wrote that Thomas carried a conservative political ideology. Her report was derided as whimsy-hating, quote, political correctness by conservative media outlets. But wait, Thomas espouses top-down leadership, is male-dominant, punishes dissent, and is uninterested in the mushy sensitivity of its PBS counterpart. Thomas and his friends often tease like this: wake up, lazy bones, do some hard work for a change. Its innate conservatism is as obvious as the liberalism of cooperative solar panel building Bob the Builder and his band of hippie hammer lovers. I never got that from Bob the Builder, but whatever, okay. Given charges that Thomas is anti-Semitic and that Sodor is a fascist paradise, Wilton's assessment is mild. Obviously, it's foolish to claim that Thomas is a fascist. He and his friends are clearly imperialist. This is interesting because this author is disagreeing with Alyssa here, but the author is making a new claim that Thomas is clearly imperialist. Imperialism is more focused on the expansion of capitalism, usually through violent coercion. You can see this throughout the history of the United States invading other countries, usually for oil and fruits and other resources. How did I get here? Having failed to reach that perfect bar of parenting, no television at all until Harvard. The exhausted parent critic sits with a train-obsessed child and the TV. I'm overeducated and understimulated, with shelves full of long-ignored critical theory books, trained with the reading of quote-unquote text through Marxist, feminist, and postmodern perspectives. It's just no wonder that the dormant critical theorist within me awakens when faced with the coded wonderland of children programming. Hitchcock is well-covered territory, but Thomas and Friends presents a minefield of untapped deconstructing opportunities. I don't know, I don't think there's anything wrong with looking this deep into it. Maybe I don't know. Critical, you make it seem like these people who are writing these articles are not letting their kids watch Thomas the Tank Engine anymore. After all, this author said it themselves, that they have a child who watches the show, so naturally they're going to watch the show with the kid. It may be a few years before I lay down the particularities of British imperialism to my son, but it's still important to instill basic skepticism in your young media consumer. Yo, this is what I'm talking about. Basic skepticism in your young media consumer. Yo, this is what I'm talking about. This is what I'm talking about. Allowing your fucking child to question authority, to question what they see on TV, and to allow them to have the tools to come to their own conclusion. This next article was written by Tracy Van Slyke. Classism, sexism, anti-environmentalism, bordering on racism. Any parent who discovered these hidden lessons will be glad the show stars just quit. Oh yeah, didn't we like already? And this is the BuzzFeed article. It's BuzzFeed. BuzzFeed sucks. But I still think it's worth reading some of this because it's honestly funny. I was reading through it. Here's why Paw Patrol is a terrible kids show. Well, you don't need to convince me. The merchandising is out of control. The show has barely been on for 3 years and Amazon lists over 3,000 Paw Patrol products. Wow, that's a lot of fucking products right here. They keep adding new gadgets and characters that expand the product line. The Lookout was apparently not enough for the team, so Ryder had to go out and get a gigantic truck called the Paw Patroller. It sells for $68.70 USD. Holy shit, that's a lot of money for a piece of shit kids toy. Let's be honest, Marshall is kind of a fuck up. I think that's one of the fucking, like, puppies. I think that's the fire truck one. That's really sad. It's just white. Ryder is a shitty CGI version of Astro Boy. Oh, poor Astro Boy. If I hear Chase is on the case one more time, I'm going to hate puppies forever. Don't hate puppies forever. Hate the police. I saw these comments earlier. They're kind of funny. I have yet to encounter a parent who hates the show. My son loves it, and I don't find it annoying at all. Like many others have said, I'd rather my kid watch this than that no good piece of shit Caillou. They really fucking have it out for Caillou. I think Paw Patrol is adorable. My 3-year-old daughter is unhealthily obsessed with it. I'd rather her watch it than the Azatrips like Yo Gabba Gabba. Wait a minute. This is what she said. Yo, okay, they're talking about like Caillou and the Azatrippy Yo Gabba Gabba in this article. I think other people have went through Alyssa's article, looked at the sources, and like fucking took shit from this article and commented here. Paw Patrol, the megalomaniacal kid show that is ruining my life. Wait, this show is ruining your life? Paw Patrol, the megalomaniacal kids TV show that's ruining my life. That's a fucking mood, Stuart, because this fucking video that I'm making is ruining my life too. Every morning at the absolute crack of dawn, I watch Paw Patrol on Netflix. This is because while my son snaps to full beam attention the very instant he wakes up, I need a few minutes to compose myself if he asks to watch Paw Patrol. And it means I'll have a chance to slowly drag myself to consciousness, then we'll watch Paw Patrol. So I think we're noticing a trend here that a lot of these fucking, people are parents of kids that watch Paw Patrol. Critical, you make it seem like that some of these fucking people are like incels locked in their mother's basement that have a weird, unhealthy obsession with Thomas and Paw Patrol. But a line was crossed when my back was turned, and now my kid has bought into Paw Patrol wholesale. If you've never seen Paw Patrol, it's essentially about Ryder, a boy whose parents didn't tell him no enough, and the megalomaniac world he's created for himself. Ryder, who lives in a glass tower high above the civilized world, has coerced a team of 5 puppies into providing the sole emergency services for his city. These puppies can talk, and they call him Sir. 20 years from now, when a grown-up fan makes a knowing Paw Patrol revival movie, Ryder will be depicted as a cackling maniac with an unstoppable god complex. But for now, all of this is implied. Yeah, this kind of reminds me of r/I'm Sorry John, which is a subreddit for Garfield, and it's all like very surrealist art, especially in the context of Garfield torturing the shit out of John. So I think that's what this author was trying to say, is that if there was anything that was made in the near future that is related to Paw Patrol, like a callback, it may be in a similar vein to r/I'm sorry John. But that's just my opinion, that's just my speculation. I may be wrong here, but I also don't feel like that's really all that off base either. This is important right here because this author is not saying writer has unstoppable God complex. It is an implied unstoppable God complex, meaning this is a prediction on how writer is going to be perceived in the future. So yeah, some of these analyses are a little dry. They were fun to read, but they're not necessarily like the exact hard-hitting analysis that I explored when I talked about these two shows. Like, I can kind of see where some of these people draw their ideas from when they analyze the show. I don't necessarily see how Thomas the Tank Engine is imperialist, and I don't even really know what a megalomaniac is confidently enough to be able to say that is what writer is. And I think it's a little strange when Critical says that none of these articles are reliable, because all of these articles are opinion pieces. These articles are based on what they've seen firsthand when they watch the show. Now, they do reference other pieces of work that analyze this topic, especially like the academic in one of the articles. But the point is that they at least wrote about it. They at least have something to say. They at least have an observation. And even if that observation is kind of not solid, at least the observation is there. It's brewing. Half-baked, sure, but at least it's a formulated opinion, or at least an actively formulating opinion. One of the authors went as far as to say that they've read like Marxist and feminist theory and stuff like that. I don't know if they've ever read Bell Hooks or Angela Davis or anything like that. All I'm saying is that some of these authors were more interested in flexing their vernacular and vocabulary library than they were analyzing the works that they were talking about. That's probably my largest criticism of these articles. But still, the point remains, Critical does not at all whatsoever introduce anything to the table. Critical still, and I mean still, specifically says that these shows should be taken at face value with no analytical framework to approach these mediums at.
The children can look at the show and take it at face value the way it's supposed to be taken and recognize these characters aren't evil megalomaniac neo-colonial autocrats or shit like that.
The way you should watch Thomas is, oh, this is a train. They do this very simple thing. That's the end of the episode. Or Paw Patrol, these are cute puppies, and that's it. It just feels like, to me, Critical is telling other people how to watch the shows. We all know he doesn't really give a shit about these shows, right? There's no reason why Critical would be this emotional over kids' TV shows, right? So this part of the video is what I consider to be the most interesting part of this entire endeavor, because Critical doesn't go into this subject at all. In fact, he brushes upon it, says it's really stupid, and then he just proceeds to move on.
I have absolutely nothing to say about this pretentious part of the article here. I really just don't even know where to begin. This is so full of shit. You're welcome to read this on your own, and if you're a rational person in even the slightest capacity, you can see why this is just so laughably bad. I don't want to go into detail on it. It's just too fucking dumb too.
Which means that now we have the burden of having to go over this section of the article, because he didn't do it. Among these cartoons, many critics exist a subgroup of parents who are okay with some degree of autocracy and Manichean dualistic politics, but just wish they would be presented with more nuance. That's not so easy, however, explained Yalda T. Ules, a research scientist who studies children and media at the University of California, Los Angeles, and for the non-profit Common Sense Media. Rigidness and simplicity of narrative in children's television shows is really important because in the real world, so much is going on, and young children aren't really capable full of abstract thought. Uhl said preschool-age children pay close attention to social cues and status in an attempt to figure out where they stand. The clearly articulated hierarchies in these cartoons confirm what they are struggling to understand in their own lives, mainly that someone else, probably a parent or teacher, is in charge. Parents concerned with the unsavory elements in the show, like Thomas and Paw Patrol, should talk to their children about them, but don't overthink it, Uhl said. They literally have a part of the video that says, don't overthink it, and here is critical.
Here's an idea for the creative team behind Paw Patrol and Thomas. Should they want to broaden their appeal to parents without alienating their fan base, I'm sure that's what they want. All of the creators out there with their billions of dollars is probably trying to look for ways to appeal more to the parents. I imagine that's what they want to do from a marketing perspective. Makes sense, Alyssa. Ryder and Sir Topham Hatt retire and are replaced by their equally domineering sisters. God, that's the saddest thing I've ever read, Alyssa. She's fucking calling for the resignation of these two characters. Apparently, she's okay with the way the characters exist as long as they weren't white males, because she's calling for them to be replaced by the females. And apparently, then it's gonna be okay. Then the show won't be fascist if the main problems here are replaced with females. Children would still get the satisfaction of immersing themselves in an orderly universe where rules are rules and everyone is in his or her place, just without the white guy on top. Oh, so there's the real problem with the cartoons. There's a white guy on top, apparently. I don't even think that's accurate for these shows, but according to Alyssa, the problem is the white devil.
Wait, what? Because what? They talked about whiteness in this article? You're mad that they brought up whiteness, Critical? The part of the article that Critical goes over is literally why I'm an anarchist. Anarchism had taught me to question unjustified hierarchies and to determine whether or not they deserve to be abolished. This scientist that Critical just completely glossed over just told parents to go home and talk to their children about what they are watching on TV, at the very minimum. And I don't know why Critical would be against having parents go home to talk to their kids about what they are watching on TV, because at least that builds a relationship with your kids. Talking about the narratives and the themes and the plot points of a particular show along with your kids can help them build conversational skills and a better understanding on how to find those plot points and subtexts in television shows. Everything that we just went over for like the last 2 hours, those are the conversations parents should be having with their kids. That is what this article is saying. And because this article mentions whiteness, which is a rigid hierarchy, Critical gets on the fucking defenses here. He goes into defense mode. But he doesn't just go into defense mode. He pulls off the Swords of Revealing Light. So now for 5 years, you can't fucking respond to this video because there's so much at play here. There's the fascist element, Thomas, Paw Patrol, the media, the layers of anti-Semitic conspiracy theories that we have to always debunk in order to meaningfully talk about this subject, because this shit is contemporary as fuck, Critical. I can understand if Critical at this point in time looks back on this video that he made and he said it could be better, it could have been better researched, but you are at this point trying to shut down a dialogue. Shutting down a dialogue about hierarchy and white supremacy. We talked earlier about how fascism can come back, can reemerge, and can show its rear ugly face. And we can't pretend that fascism isn't on the rise today, considering that various fascists have a large platform. White supremacy is not only a hierarchy, but it is also inherently coercive, and shows examples of this within the very system that we see today, including the very FBI report of law enforcement being infiltrated by white supremacists. Not to mention, race wouldn't be enforced as a class system until colonialism. So, who conquered who, Critical? And if Ryder and Sir Topham Hatt are the top dogs and they're being represented as white men, then what? It's like, are you serious? Of course they're white men. White men are the generally accepted status quo. You're a white man. I don't mean to make it personal against you, but you brought this onto yourself here because you did this part of the video so shittily. You're not wrong in saying that this article is poorly written. You just couldn't fucking critique it right. This video that you made could have been so much better if you took a much more rational approach here. I would have never read this article had you have never talked about this article. And I went to go read the article, and what did we find? The exact loophole in your fucking argument. The narrative in these shows are different than the social cues and the status quo that are maintained in these shows. There's of course the plot, which of course it's about eating your vegetables and shit. But then there's the actual main setting of these stories. Thomas and his friends are workers. They clock in and they start doing different jobs in different sectors. That's what they do. And Ryder just comes on down from his tower with 5 dogs and they take care of the city because the mayor can't for some reason. Maybe the writers wrote her that way for some reason. I don't know. Would it be because Ryder, the sole ownership of all of these industries on Adventure Bay, works in a free market monopoly capitalism? I don't know. You're allowed to have your own analysis on it. You're allowed to disagree with mine. But at least what this article is doing, it's attempting to have that dialogue in the first place. And because of what I'm going to fucking say as Critical's white privilege here, he wants to shut down this discussion. Let's talk about that for a bit. Oh, she said white privilege. Oh, yep, that's it. Yep, this is it. There's a really interesting book that I read a few years ago called White Fragility. Why it's so hard for white people to talk about racism.
I don't want to go into detail on it.
This book was banned in 2022. According to an article in 2021 by Marshall University, an English teacher at Choctaw High School in Fort Walton, Florida, assigned this book to her senior class students. She had discussed the title and her plans to use it with the principal during the summer. But when the book was taught, parents objected. According to the teacher, quote, I got a few calls from parents who were appalled. How dare you read this book? And racism is not an issue in America, and you are making it one. That to me alone, after reading the book, was more of a reason why we need the book. But after the teacher appealed to the board, she was allowed to use excerpts from the book in the classroom. Oh shit, we really do not like this book at all whatsoever. We would rather that you don't teach it. But because you're pressing a really hard case to get it taught in your classroom, you can use excerpts of this specific book in your classrooms. Okay, here's an excerpt from this book. It is white people's responsibility to be less fragile. People of color don't need to twist themselves into knots trying to navigate us as painlessly as possible. Now, if you want this video to really be about white privilege, I mean, I don't really want to have this conversation further than just me responding to Critical here, but Critical is the one who is shutting down this discussion of questioning the legitimacy of white supremacist hierarchies. I don't think Critical is a fascist, as I said earlier in this video, and I don't think that Critical would like to use labels to describe himself, but for the sake of this video, we are gonna have to label him something. There's nothing wrong with Critical making political videos.
Now my channel has always just been me making things I have fun making, talking about things I want to talk about, joke about shit I want to joke about. I just kind of treat it like a public diary, kind of like Doug's journal from that cartoon Doug, but instead of having a cool alter ego superhero like Quail Man, my alter ego is a fucking sex toy stuntman. But the point I'm making is, I've always just talked about things that I've had on my mind at the time.
But this was such a shoddy video because of the fact that he was trying to disseminate a dialogue here. It's very plainly obvious. And I don't know how much longer he can just say, well, I'm just attacking this person for her journalism in good faith any much longer. So to describe Critical's political leanings, I'm going to basically lay down 3 words. Centrist reaction reactionary liberal. Firstly, let's make it clear that Critical does not really like to talk about politics very often. He does talk about politics, but just not as often as some other figures may. And second, I'm using these words to describe Critical's behavior as he goes into these subjects. Let's take a video that he made a couple years ago called Serious Video. In this video, he talks about George Floyd and his sympathies with the protesters.
Now, you probably don't need to be a psychic with a crystal ball to guess what's been on my mind this week with everything that's happened in the country, with the murder of George Floyd at the hands of police officers, as well as all the protests that have come as a result of that, as well as other things that built up to it.
Something that even I could get behind. And then he talks about systemic racism.
Oh, you know, Mr. Floyd may have looked at a picture of marijuana earlier that day, which caused his body to shut down at the exact moment that the officer's knee was on his neck. In fact, while looking at Mr. Floyd's brain, I was able to see that he had a dream the night before he was arrested where he was smoking weed in that dream, so perhaps that dream may have played a role in his death. Just some straight up garbage from the first medical examiner that I think he needs to be charged with trying to conceal the murder. An independent autopsy was just completed today that confirmed that it was the officer's actions that led to his death via asphyxiation. So I think all of that is terrible, obviously. Now, for the protests, I 100% support the protest. I 100% support the Black Lives Matter movement and the message that they're trying to send and trying to change the systemic racism. I think it's a huge problem that needs to be addressed, and I think the protests and all of that is great.
What the fuck are you talking about, Critical? Because systemic racism is a hierarchy. And my friend, you are missing the point in your earlier video about fascism in Thomas and Paw Patrol and going over these hierarchies in general.
10 iPads open, taking notes everywhere. They got a cork board in the background, little notepads and strings connecting all these dots and then leading to this overblown and way off the mark character analysis.
The reason why this video is so long, Critical, is that you tried to do what I have just done just now in the form of 10 minutes. I had to do it because you are super fucking sloppy at your critique of this article. I want to have faith that perhaps Critical has already analyzed a lot of these thoughts that he had previously in previous moments throughout the last 5 years. And from the very little that I have seen him do, it does seem like he's taking steps in that direction. But I want to now bring attention to something else entirely. On March 15, 2019, there were 2 simultaneous mass shootings at the Al-Noor Mosque and Linwood Islamic Center in Christchurch, New Zealand. These were attacks committed by white supremacists, and in their manifestos they said subscribe to PewDiePie. Now, full transparency, PewDiePie has acknowledged this and said that this shit was disgusting, and mass shootings like this is the result of generalized hate speech. And of course, in good faith, we can assume that Critical doesn't endorse any of this behavior either, which means that Critical should be able to endorse discussion about this heavy topic. This isn't to say that PewDiePie caused the Christchurch shooting, and it's not to say that Critical will cause a shooting either, but if we don't have a culture that is willing to question the nature of uprising fascist movements in our contemporary day, then we are going to have exactly that. Fascism uprising without any resistance. And that is what is wrong with centrist reactionary liberals, trying to remain neutral in the center without any real understanding of context and consequences for not knowing the context. Maintaining the status quo against people's will for political change, even if that change is necessary for a better future. Having a wish-wash relationship with fascists, performatively stating that you're against anti-Semitism and genocidal eugenics, while blocking the punch that Richard Spencer was struck by and missing the one that Nathan Domingo made. And the shooting that took place in 2019 is an example of stochastic terrorism, accelerating the rise of violence while demonizing certain people groups, and generalizing this violence in such a way that it becomes common for people to be under under attack. And what's worse for those who stand by law enforcement, this makes these specific kinds of attacks unpredictable as fuck. And given that law enforcement only prevent like 2% of all crime according to the University of Utah of Law in a study in 2020, good luck trying to catch these people, because police aren't even preventative. That's the problem. That's the fundamental systemic problem. That's why it's important that we talk about things like this. That is why these kinds of discussions are worth having, critical. And as an anarchist, a lot of things that are usually said to me is that anarchists are really good at pointing out problems, but never propose any solutions. Well, I have a solution, but it doesn't have to be the only solution. In fact, my solution is a broad umbrella of solutions. Let us zoom out.
Christmas came early many years ago and Christmas never left. This is the gift that keeps on giving. It's like the fucking Allspark.
So, I want you to pause the video if you feel that it is necessary and genuinely ask yourself the question, what is anti-fascism? As in, what do you perceive anti-fascism to be? Have this be a mental dialogue to yourself about this for a second. When you hear about Antifa, where do you hear it from? Is it from the media? Is it from anti-fascists themselves? Do you have any anti-fascists to go off of to know what anti-fascism is? Critical may answer with, I don't like fascism, and that would make him anti-fascist. He doesn't need to do a blood oath or anything, he's just anti-fascist. If you're against fascism, it's plain and simple, you're anti-fascist. Way to go. Anti-fascism is best described as an attitude towards fascism, as in anything that you see in the name of anti-fascism is a reaction to fascism. There's a hidden cheat code, that is, if you want to get rid of Antifa, you have to get rid of the fascists. Anti-fascists only come out when there are fascists. If that means a Nazi cop is on a shooting spree, Antifa comes out. If that means a white ethno-state clown gives a speech about Nazi ideas, then Antifa will be there too. Anti-fascism and anti-racism doesn't just end by saying that Nazi ideas are bad. You have to do something about it. You also have to have an eye for where it is present, whether it be in private or in public.
You know, I really hate to say this, and I definitely hesitate to say this, but Antifa is winning.
Not to mention, Antifa doesn't have to be just brawls on the street. There are all different types of anti-fascist action, whether it be informing your community, gathering data, creating a self-defense network among your neighbors, supporting labor unions, supporting tenant unions, and thus uprooting grassroots and inclusive mutual aid organizations. Having anti-fascist presence is absolutely necessary. Some of y'all in the comment section are like, oh, that guy in particular is just some regular, average, everyday person doing what normal, average, everyday people would do in the sight of a Nazi. And that's exactly it. You need to make anti-fascism part of your everyday culture. That's the point. And it's very worrying how fascism is not considered a community threat. Anti-fascism is extremely diverse, and that's intentional in both people and in tactics. Anti-fascists believe in different things, including but not limited to anarchism, communism, socialism, liberals, conservatives even. There are conservatives who don't like Nazis. That exists, as weird as it is to say. But that is to say anti-fascism is an idea explicitly, and it's not an organization. It is not you Antifa, it is you Antifa. As in, if you are against anti-fascism, you are doing a double negative, which makes you a fascist. I can imagine Critical is saying something to the effect of, well, Antifa burned this down and Antifa does all these weird fucking crazy trash fire burnings. It's weird. Why? It's very possible that anti-fascist movements have been infiltrated a few times by law enforcement. In fact, that has happened before. There is a plethora of anarchist literature specifically talking about how to maintain security culture within anarchist circles. And even if maybe one trash fire had the fucking paw prints of one of the anarchists that threw a Molotov at the dirty ass trash can, how dare it get in their way? Anti-fascists are not levying genocide. Anti-fascist action is backed by a reaction to fascist behavior and fascist organizing. So when I made this video response to Critical, I feel like one of the first things people are gonna do is be like, oh look, it's Antifa, fucking Antifa, fuck Antifa, am I right? But that's why you gotta ask the question to yourself, do you know what anti-fascism is? Because if we have these problems where we see fascist uprisings and far-right mass shootings, what would be antithetical to this violence? Would it be funding the police? In 2021, police gangs in LAPD killed over 157% more than the previous year in civilian casualties, with a massive increase of $3 billion in police budgeting for that year. Do you think that Google LSAD gangs were killing Nazis and fascists? Of course not. And all of this that I am talking about requires a diversity of tactics to maintain our solutions here. And in the name of anti-fascism, anti-fascism needs to be what it is called. It needs to be a mainstream idea to be against fascism. It is so wild how many people will stand behind the Constitution while upholding fascist worldviews, while we presently still have book burnings today. And speaking on the dangers of book burnings, if we look at the original pictures of book burnings in Nazi Germany, the books that were being burned in this specific book burning were published and held by the Institute of Sexology. And if you don't know what that is, it is the first medical institution that studied LGBT healthcare and reproductive healthcare and endocrinology for transgender people. And I don't think that you need to look outside of the window for too long before a self-proclaimed theocratic fascist makes his rear ugly face.
Hey my friend, what is a woman really, you know what I mean?
I feel like some people in the comment section might say something to the effect of, you need to start using softer terms here, like, these guys aren't fascists, they're far-right extremists, and you are an anarchist, you're a left-wing extremist. No, I'm not gonna change my fucking language to yield to your feelings here. I literally made a video a few days ago about how I shouldn't change my language to explain why I fucking hate pedophiles. This is what it sounds like when people say you can't talk about fascism, or you can't talk about anarchism, or you can't say these specific words because they make you sound unapproachable or whatever. This kind of conversation should be normalized. If Critical truly asked himself if he was against fascism, I'm pretty sure he would say yes, but at the same time, he needs to consider himself in the context of the rest of the discourse here. I don't need Critical to go on some redemption arc in his YouTube career. I don't want that out of Critical. It would be incredibly performative, and it would not be helpful for anything that I am talking about. Rather, I want him to sit on a bunch of these ideas that I've explored today in this video. That's why this really wasn't like a takedown, like I'm gonna take out Exodia and boom! My cards have no pathetic grandpas, Kaiba. Try not to judge these topics immediately. In fact, I would rather you come back to this video from time and time again. Maybe in 5 years, maybe in 10 years, 20 years. I would like for you to really think about this, and I extend this invitation not just to Critical, not just to his audience, but also to everyone on planet Earth. Capitalism is in decline right now, and fascist militias and boogaloo buttfucks are taking notes. Fascists prey on vulnerable men, usually gamers. And that's not a nod against gamers. I love video games. But a lot of gamers are very lost in this world, and they don't know who to turn to, and that makes them very easy to prey on by fascist organizers. It makes it really easy for fascists to say, hey, you like shoot? Yeah? You want to do that for real? Come join us. Oh, but I like red faction, sorry. Fuck you. Critical, you have a responsibility to talk about this in depth. You were involved in trying to shut this conversation down, and that is immature and also very not cool. At the beginning of the video, I talked about satire, and I wanted to know if this video that you produced is a form of satire because of how not very serious I take this video. Okay, I did take this video seriously, but what I'm talking about here is the way that you just do not add anything here. If you're going to criticize something, at least add an example. If Alyssa is not going to define what she means by neo-colonial, and you're not going to address your white fragility, then that means this video is long. Fuck you both. You freaking fricks. When will you learn? When will you learn that your actions have consequences? But I think that on its own is the best way to end this video. I don't think that Smegma Sailor Steve threw Critical into the gulag. I think we're good. But we also need to develop into our future a cultural attitude that has no tolerance for fascism. Tolerance for intolerance does not negate tolerance. Debating fascists is fucking dangerous as shit. You risk putting people's lives on the line, especially marginalized and colonized peoples. And when fascists notice the decline of capitalism, they are quick to use marginalizing scapegoats. And that in and of itself can lead to genocide. Politicians in the United States are rallying hard against LGBT people and abortion rights. An anti-fascist solution to this problem would be to create education about LGBTQ+ rights and abortion. But all of that is being rallied against by the fascists. Even self-proclaimed theocratic fascist Matt Walsh. The best way to convey the severity of the situation is to read this very famous poem. It goes something like this. First they came for the socialist, and I did not speak out because I was not a socialist. Then they came for the trade unionist, and I did not speak out because I was not a trade unionist. Then they came for the Jews, and I did not speak out because I was not a Jew. Then they came for me, and there was no one left to speak for me. In 1932, there were German anti-fascists organizing against the rise of the Nazi Party, organizing alongside with anti-fascist Jewish coalitions. We never really hear about the resistance to the Nazis' rise to power. We always wonder why. Why did it happen? But the reason why is because there needed to be more people standing in solidarity with these various anti-fascist movements. And remaining silent in moments like this perpetuates the violence committed by fascists and Nazis. And so I think that if we're ever going to talk about fascism, we need to understand holistically and comprehend that fascism, as the ripple effect of the decline of capitalism, will accelerate human extinction. Letting fascism live is a health crisis because it literally eats itself alive, and thus it should never happen again. If you are one of these people who believe that anti-fascists are too violent or just violent period and that is bad, please understand that anti-fascist violence is reciprocal towards fascist violence. It is antithetical to fascism, which means that when you criticize anti-fascists, you're probably critiquing the tactics being used. And that is definitely up for discussion. There are ways to approach every situation creatively and conclusively, to innovate ideas on top of that in order to combat fascism. But what isn't going to combat fascism is maintaining the status quo, saving face, and being reactionary into oblivion. Shutting down discussion on how to identify fascist hierarchies is not an example on how to prevent fascist hierarchies. Fascist hierarchies rise when there is no resistance, either through misinformation or obfuscation. Fascist behavior begets fascist behavior when there is no accountability. And that is what I want Critical, and more importantly his audience, to deeply consider. If something is fascist, and if it is allowed to exist, which is a form of coercive conformity to a mythological rebirth of a status quo that requires the extermination of people that do not fit within the status quo, just how long do we wait until we say, Nazis are in town, it's way past time for us to send these fucks home? That, my friends, is why I made this video. Because I want Critical to take steps actively. Doesn't have to show me the receipts or anything. Doesn't need to give me a book report on Peter Kropotkin's Conquest of Bread. Doesn't need to carry the little fucking red book of Mao. I want him to think before he opens his fucking mouth.
Christmas came early many years ago, and Christmas never left.